The fact that ships weighing thousands of tons of steel can actually float is a marvel of science. Maintaining the balance of a ship through ballast tanks and weight distribution is fascinating. But when that balance is broken, it can quickly lead to devastating results. These are the stories of vessels that have capsized. You may have already seen some of these as individual stories on this channel, so use the chapters in the description below to navigate the stories in this compilation. On the evening of the 27th of March 1980, a storm in the North Sea with winds gusting up to 45 miles an hour causes 40-foot waves that capsize the Alexander Keeland oil platform, killing 123 men. But was it just the weather that devastated the Keeland? Alexander L. Keeland is a Norwegian offshore semi-submersible drilling rig. The rig is named after Norwegian novelist Alexander Lange Keeland. It's built at a French shipyard as a mobile drilling platform and delivered to Stavanger Drilling in July 1976. It's initially designed as a drilling platform, but there's a shortage of drilling contracts, and so the platform is temporarily repurposed to offer living accommodation for personnel from several nearby rigs. It's used as a floating hotel or flotel for employees on the nearby Edda 2-7C platform. Workers can walk to the flotel through a sea bridge connecting the Edda oil rig to the platform. On the deck, there are shipping container apartments to accommodate up to 348 crew and a drilling derrick. There's a helipad so crew can be transported by helicopter to and from land and other platforms. The platform feels like a bustling airport terminal with helicopters coming and going at all times, day and night. The platform has 5 vertical columns with a height of 115 feet and 28 feet in diameter, which act as pontoons to provide buoyancy for the platform. They can also be partially filled with seawater, which provides stability. The columns are placed at 5 points around the platform like a pentagon, with bracing running between them and the deck. The braces are welded in place using a fillet weld. A fillet weld is a type of weld used to attach a metal plate to another at a 90-degree angle. The welds are subjected to extreme forces from the huge pontoons and braces pulling in different directions. Without this bracing, the structure would be pulled apart by the relentless swell and storms in the North Sea. Fatigue cracks in the fillet weld should be re-welded and maintained over time. The Keeland is 338 feet by 325 feet and weighs over 10,000 tons. The platform has 6 anchors holding the rig in position. In 1978, several new accommodation container blocks are added to the drilling deck of the platform, increasing its total capacity to 386 people. If they get a lucrative drilling contract, these containers are simple to remove. The crew members talk about the platform as one of the greatest in the North Sea. In 1980, the Keeland is contracted to Phillips Petroleum. On the 27th of March 1980, the rig's located 200 miles east of Dundee, Scotland. A storm is approaching and the crew are readying the Edda oil platform for impact. As the storm builds, it knocks out several electrical outputs on the platform. Helicopters are grounded and management decide to evacuate non-essential crew from the Edda to the Keeland. The crew batten down and secure all drilling and manufacturing gear on the deck of the Edda. Non-essential crew and support staff transfer to the Keeland via the sea bridge. The winds are reaching up to 70 miles an hour. 50-foot waves batter the 2 platforms. As the swell rolls through and the winds push against the structure, the welds that secure the support braces are working to withstand the extreme forces. The head count is 212 people on board the Keeland when they remove the sea bridge and disconnect from the Edda. The Alexander Keeland drifts slightly away from the Edda. Crew who transfer to the Keeland find relief in a safe space. They're reading, sleeping or eating in the cafeteria. At 18:30, the crew hear a loud bang which echoes through the rig. They assume it's a huge wave hitting the deck. Then 2 more quickly follow like a loud crack, followed by a trembling that reverberates through the platform. A fatigue crack in a fillet weld gives way and the braces supporting one of the pontoons are pulled apart. As the pontoon is ripped from the platform, the weight shifts in an instant, knocking people off their feet. The crew members can't process what's happening. They can feel the Alexander Keelant is heeling to one side. The platform tilts 40 degrees in seconds. Some men relaxing in their cabins can feel the Keelant start to tilt, but there's no announcement from the control center. They don't know if they should stay in their cabins or make their way to their muster stations. Water seeps into the passageways and men are slipping as they try to navigate the corridors. Crew member Jan Janssen hears men screaming in the corridors and in their cabins. 130 men gather in the designated emergency muster stations located in the mess hall and cinema. Jan Janssen fights his way to the deck to secure the lifeboats. When he reaches the deck, all he can see is the dark, foggy sky. The intense rain and cold wind lashes his face. The heavy waves continue to pound the deck of the rig, causing violent shakes throughout the Keelant. The rig rolls in the swell. The weight of the lifeboats shift, and 3 of the 7 on board are washed off the deck in the swell and heavy seas. To secure the 4 remaining lifeboats, Janssen and his colleagues must get to the other side of the platform, which is riding high out of the water. They have to climb the sloping deck of the Keelant. If they slip, below them is the freezing ocean. But even if they make it to the lifeboats, they can't be certain they'll be able to lower them into the sea. They fight their way up the tilting platform. Some men make it up the platform and lower themselves into the lifeboats, but the Keelant continues to tilt. The generators cut out, casting the platform into darkness. Men are stuck inside the accommodation blocks. The angle of the floor is so steep they can't climb out. Chairs and tables are sliding down the floor in pitch black rooms. On the deck, men are climbing the handrails to get to the highest point of the rig. If they stay in position holding the handrails, no ship can reach them. The wind is blowing at 60 to 70 miles an hour with heavy fog engulfing the rig. The rig is now heeling at a 60-degree angle. Reaching a lifeboat seems like the only chance for survival. The only alternative is to take their chances in the freezing North Sea. Those who make it to the lifeboat still face a major problem. A lifeboat is usually deployed using gravity to drop into the ocean. The angle of the tilting rig means the lifeboats don't have a clear path to the sea. Men struggle to release each lifeboat, but 3 are stuck and don't budge. Eventually they manage to release the last lifeboat, and there isn't enough space for all the men. With no options left, the remaining crew start to jump from high on the rig. They plunge several feet under the frigid waters with no life jackets or survival suits. As they hit the freezing water, they have to fight their body's impulse to gasp for air, or they'll inhale water and drown. Cold water shock sends their heart rate and blood pressure soaring. Crew from the Edda now release the Edda's lifeboats and send out a distress signal. The Alexander Keelant is almost 90 degrees. Men in the water are fighting for their lives. They try to hold their composure long enough to catch their breath. Then they start to swim towards the Edda platform. The upper pontoons of the Alexander Keelant are completely out of the water. The listing rig is acting like a sail caught in the high winds. The first anchor chain snaps under the extreme forces, then another until only one anchor chain remains intact. The men still on the platform are now trapped in a sinking vessel. The wind continues to blow. The final anchor chain holding the Keelant steady snaps a little over 20 minutes after the first support brace breaks free. Without any support, the rig slowly rolls, leaving crew members trapped and fighting for their lives. 30 minutes after the first sound of a cracking fillet weld, the 10,000-ton Alexander Keelant rolls over and is fully inverted. 50 men are trapped under the capsized rig. Crew on board the Edda can see men in the water battling the heavy rain and strong winds. If the men in the sea aren't pulled from the water soon, they'll either drown or freeze to death. One of the Keelant's lifeboats surfaces, but it's upside down. Some men in the water climb onto one side. They use their weight and the waves washing over the lifeboat to flip it right side up. They start to pull their colleagues to the safety of the lifeboat. 19 men. Nobody's prepared for such a devastating disaster. Only a handful of the 212 men on board the Keelant make it to their cabin to retrieve their survival suit. A survival suit is like a dry suit that creates an air gap between your body and the water. 47 vessels, 24 helicopters, and almost 2,000 men responded to the distress signal from the Edda. only 89 of the 212 crew survive. 123 drown in the frigid waters. The commission appointed to examine the incident found that a fatigue fracture in a support brace on one of the platform's columns was the direct cause. An insufficient weld wasn't picked up during manufacturing, resulting in the formation of a fracture that grew over time. The Agulhas Current flows down the east coast of South Africa. It's the most powerful ocean current on the globe. In 1991, the Oceanus loses a fight against the current, 40-knot winds, 9-meter swell, poor maintenance, and bad decisions. Oceanus was a French-built and Greek-owned cruise ship. The ship was originally launched in July 1952 as the Jean Laborde in Forges Chantiers de la Gironde in Bordeaux as the last of 4 sister ships constructed for Messageries Maritimes. Perhaps you can let me know in the comments how badly I've butchered those French names. It's 153 meters long, 20 meters at the beam, draws 7 meters below the waterline, and has a capacity of 550 passengers plus 250 crew. Its first charter as a passenger ship is the route between Marseille, Madagascar, and Mauritius. Over a period of more than 20 years, it undergoes several name changes, including Mykonai, Ancona, and Eastern Princess, before being registered in Piraeus in Greece as Oceanus in 1976. Originally built as an ocean-going passenger vessel, the Oceanus undergoes massive reconstruction before it begins to operate as a cruise liner for Epiroutiki Lines of Greece. Between 1988 and 1991, Epiroutiki Lines loses 2 vessels. Their flagship Pegasus catches fire and sinks in shallow water, and motor vessel Jupiter collides with a freight ship and sinks in 82 meters of water, taking 4 lives with it. In 1991, Oceanus is chartered by TFC Tours of Johannesburg in South Africa for an 8-month season. The ship is almost 40 years old and shows signs of wear and tear. There are several loose hull plates, which are the sheets of metal that form the outer hull of the ship. On a recent trip to Mozambique, the ship experiences problems with sewage water rising up through some showers and toilets. The repairs start by removing several faulty non-return valves from the sewage holding tanks. The ventilation pipe is also removed from the sewage tank, leaving a 10-centimeter hole between the generator room and the holding tank. The repairs are not finalized. The non-return valves and ventilation pipe are not replaced. At 1500 on the 3rd of August 1991, the Oceanus departs from East London in South Africa en route to Durban. Its departure time is delayed because of a bomb threat. Captain Yanis Avranis, a seasoned mariner with 20 years experience as an officer and 30 as a seaman, is at the helm. As the ship heads into 40-knot winds and confronts towering 9-meter swell, the sea conditions grow increasingly turbulent. The usual sail-away party with musicians and entertainers, Moss Hills and his wife Tracy, is scheduled to take place on deck. The rough seas force them to change the venue for the shelter inside the Four Seasons Lounge. Despite Moss, Tracy, and the ship's entertainment crew's best efforts to create a festive atmosphere, most passengers opt to stay in their cabins to ride out the storm. The storm intensifies as the evening wears on. During the first sitting of dinner, the waiters struggle to maintain their balance, making it difficult to carry food trays without spilling. Cutlery slides off the dining tables while the ship rolls in the swell and wind. Just what you want on an ocean cruise. Ships have an opening to the sea below the waterline called a sea chest. This allows the ship to draw ocean water to cool the engines and distribute to ballast tanks. The sea chest has sprung a leak. At 21:30 off the wild coast of the Transkei, there's a small explosion in the engine room. Then the ship loses power. The ship's engineer reports to Captain Avranis that water is breaching the hull, flooding the generator room, which has created a small explosion as the generator short circuits. Without power, the engines die and the ship begins to drift in the heavy seas. The water level continues to rise until it reaches the 10 centimeter hole in the bulkhead where the air vent pipe should be. Seawater breaches the bulkhead and fills the sewage tank. With the non-return valves in this holding tank removed for repairs, water travels up through the main drainage pipes. Showers, toilets, and waste disposal units connected to the system allow water to flow from the sea chest through the sewage holding tank and up into the cabins. The crew in the engine room escape the flooding compartment. In their panic, they don't close the lower deck bulkhead hatches, which is standard procedure during an emergency situation. With the engine snuffed, the ship loses any stability created from its momentum through the swell. As the ship rolls idle through the rough seas, waves slam against the deteriorating exterior hull plates. The crew don't sound the alarms, nor make any announcements to alert the passengers to the situation they're facing. Moss Hills, a musician from Zimbabwe, and his wife Tracy, along with their fellow entertainers, notice the ship rolling in a way that doesn't feel normal. The ship is listing to starboard. They decide to investigate. As they head below decks, they find water flooding through the cabins and into the passageways. The Oceanus is sinking. Lorraine Betts, the cruise director, tells them that the captain has given the order to the crew to abandon ship. Crew members make their way to the lifeboats and start to evacuate the ship. They take on board any passengers immediately available, but don't fill the lifeboats before making their escape. They don't even fill the lifeboats before cutting the lines. Moss and Tracy waste no time and start launching the remaining lifeboats with up to 90 passengers in each one. The lifeboat's engines don't start, and so they drift with the currents, the wind, and the waves. As the ship lists further to starboard, it becomes too dangerous to continue launching lifeboats. Almost 220 people remain on board the sinking ship. Moss Hills and several passengers make their way up to the bridge to find crew members who can help with the evacuation. The bridge is unmanned. Moss uses the radio to broadcast a distress call. Captain Detmar on board the container ship Ned Lloyd Mauritius responds to the mayday call. Moss explains the situation, that he's the guitarist on board and that the crew are not on the bridge. After a short pause to take in the staggering incompetence, Captain Detmar starts to give Moss information on how to handle the situation. He then broadcasts the coordinates of the Oceanus and requests ships in the vicinity to provide assistance and relays the situation to the South African authorities. The South African Navy and the South African Air Force dispatch 16 helicopters to assist with the search and rescue operation. These helicopters are tasked with airlifting the passengers and crew to the nearby settlements of The Haven and Hole in the Wall, approximately 6 miles south of Coffee Bay on the Wild Coast. Captain Detmar on the Ned Lloyd Mauritius deploys his lifeboats and crew to take passengers on board. The first helicopter to arrive lowers 2 Navy divers onto the deck of the Oceanus to help coordinate the evacuation. Captain Avranus is first in line. Navy diver Paul Wiley pushes him aside and tells him to wait until women, children, and elderly passengers are evacuated. Wiley then steps away to find an elderly passenger, and when he returns, Avranus has pushed the passengers aside, strapped himself in, and is being hoisted to safety. Among the 16 rescue helicopters are 13 South African Air Force Pumas, 9 of which are engaged in hoisting the 220 people off the deck of the sinking vessel, while the rest search the area for survivors. The rescue helicopters perform an aerial ballet, lifting passengers from the forward and aft decks. The helicopters take turns to load passengers, fly them to shore, and return to the ship. Cruise Director Lorraine Betts ensures the elderly, women, and children receive priority. Entertainers Julian Butler, Moss Hills, Tracy Hills, and Robert Boltman are among the last 5 people to be winched from the deck of the sinking ship. All 581 people on board make it safely to shore during a 7-hour rescue operation. At 15:30 the following day, Oceanus starts to tilt over to one side and its stern rises up. The bow hits the sandy seabed about 90 meters deep. More than 60 meters of the stern stands above the water. minutes later, the ship slowly slips beneath the waterline. The Oceanus comes to rest on its starboard side with its bow facing out to sea. Captain Avranus gets caught in the spotlight. Much like the captain of the Costa Concordia, Avranus leaves the ship while hundreds of passengers wait to be rescued, with only the ship's entertainers to assist in the evacuation. He defends his actions, claiming he left the ship early to organize the rescue efforts and then supervise the rescue from a helicopter. Avranus says the dead batteries of the crew's walkie-talkies are the cause of the communication obstacle.
When I order abandon the ship, doesn't matter what time I leave. Abandon is for everybody. If something they like to stay, they can stay.
Despite his explanation, the media portrays him as an example of unprofessional behavior while in command. In 1992, Captain Avranus and other officers are found guilty of negligence by a Greek board of inquiry for fleeing the ship without aiding the passengers during the crisis. Avranus doesn't do any jail time, and his employer, Epirotiki Lines, gives him command of a ferry until his retirement. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more videos from this channel without any ads, please consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description. You can join for free or select a membership with benefits ranging from ad-free videos through to early access and live Q&A calls. I look forward to meeting you there. There's a hurricane out here and we're heading straight into it. This is the last message to family from the second mate of the El Faro, a cargo ship with a 40-year career that ended in disaster. According to the latest weather reports, the ship is heading directly into a major hurricane. The captain, however, won't listen to the warnings from his deck officers. 33 lives are at stake. Should the crew fight him to change his mind, or is he making a good decision based on experience? Weather reporters have been taking note of a well-defined surface low that's been strengthening in the Western Atlantic. These are important weather events that forecasters pay close attention to because they can indicate that a major storm is developing. The El Faro's usual shipping path is between the US East Coast and Puerto Rico, and the surface low is developing close to it. The El Faro has sailed this route without trouble for most of its career, and the ship's crew should be able to deal with the storm. Who would have guessed this trip would be its last? The El Faro was originally built by Sun Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Corporation in Chester, Pennsylvania in 1975. When the ship was first commissioned, it was given the name Puerto Rico. It was a roll-on, roll-off cargo ship with a length of 241 meters, a beam of 28.6 meters, and a draft of 12.8 meters. It had a gross tonnage of 31,515 tons, a max speed of 22 knots, and was powered by a steam turbine engine. For its first 15 years of operation, the El Faro was used by a Puerto Rican company to haul cargo between the east coast of the US and Puerto Rico. From 1991 to 2003, the ship ran a route between Anchorage, Alaska and Tacoma, Washington, under the name Northern Lights. It was then chartered by the US military for the Iraq War in 2003, serving this charter until 2006. After the Iraq War, the ship returned to its route between US and Puerto Rico and was given the name El Faro. It's back on this, the ship's original route, that we join the El Faro on its final voyage. The surface low that's been developing in the Western Atlantic has been generating increasingly worse conditions out at sea. Thunderstorms and convective showers are developing within its area. Over the course of the day, these thunderstorms and rain showers will also increase in number and severity. As the low develops, the chances of it becoming a hurricane are increasing. Weather reporters are monitoring the situation carefully. While these reports are vital to lots of people, for shipping crews they're particularly important, and storm warning signs are taken seriously. The crew of the El Faro and the company that owns it need to pay close attention to the weather systems developing out at sea. Otherwise, they risk sailing the Alfaro straight into a very dangerous storm. The following day, on the 28th of September, the Alfaro is at the port of Jacksonville in Florida. The ship is operated by Tote Services Incorporated. Tote Services Inc. is a subsidiary of Solchuk, which is a large family distribution and transportation company based in Seattle, Washington. It's already been unloaded, having come from San Juan, Puerto Rico. Now it's being reloaded with cargo for the return journey. Containers are loaded on the upper deck. Roll-on, roll-off cargo is driven into the holds below deck via cargo ramps. Once the roll-on, roll-off cargo is placed in a stowed position, lashing gangs secure it with chains and other lashing gear. The crew of the Alfaro leaves the stevedores and longshoremen to do the job on their own. What the crew should do is pay attention and make sure the cargo is being secured in accordance with the cargo securing manual. In hold 3, the stevedores and longshoremen secure cars with chains that run across the width of the ship. In this arrangement, a single chain is used to secure an entire line of cars. Each car is then secured to the chain. This single chain system is potentially vulnerable in tough conditions. While the ship has been in port overnight, the surface low in the Atlantic has been intensifying. At 0300, the National Hurricane Center, or NHC, upgrades its status and declares it a tropical depression, one step away from being a major storm. It's the 11th tropical depression of the season, and it's given the official title Tropical Depression 11. The National Hurricane Center issues a public advisory that Tropical Depression 11 has now been upgraded to a tropical storm. In line with tradition, it's given a name and becomes Tropical Storm Joaquin. At the moment, Tropical Storm Joaquin is 295 nautical miles northeast of San Salvador and heading in a southwesterly direction at a speed of about 4 knots. This is straight in the direction of the Alfaro's normal route to San Juan. The shipping community are fully aware of the danger of the storm, and it's on everyone's mind. The Alfaro's voyage won't be cancelled though. Ships like the Alfaro can sail in storm conditions. Large merchant ships can handle very rough seas. They can also plan ahead and avoid storms big enough to sink them. The man in charge of Alfaro is Captain Michael Davidson, a 53-year-old shipping veteran known for his safety-first attitude. Davidson's been working at sea since the age of 16. He's a Maritime Academy graduate and has worked his way through the ranks to become a captain. Davidson has lengthy experience of sailing the notoriously rough Gulf of Alaska. He's known for being meticulous and safety conscious. He's a well-regarded and respected ship's captain. Today, his most important job is plotting the Alfaro's route on its journey to San Juan. Davidson needs to make sure he judges Tropical Storm Joaquin correctly. He needs to look at all the possible ways in which the storm could develop and choose a route that will ensure the ship and its crew remain protected. The subject of the storm is discussed with Davidson on several occasions. The first recorded discussion comes at 10:03 when he receives a text message from a second mate of the Alfaro who's currently off duty. The message simply advises him of the presence of the storm. Davidson responds acknowledging that he's aware of it. At this point, there are many possibilities about what could happen with Tropical Storm Joaquin. Weather information comes from a range of sources. Forecasts can be conflicting, and forecasts for Joaquin vary between weather services. At the moment, forecasters are uncertain about what direction it will take. Previously, the National Hurricane Center advisories had predicted that Joaquin would change to a northerly heading and not impact the Bahamas. At 16:51, however, advisory notices issued by the National Hurricane Center indicate that the storm could in fact hit the Bahamas. They also predict that it could strengthen and hit the Bahamas as a hurricane. Sailors need to look carefully at all the different possibilities and make a safe judgment. At 18:31, the off-duty second mate sends a follow-up text to Davidson asking what specific route he plans to take to avoid Tropical Storm Joaquin. Davidson responds that he intends to take the normal, direct route to San Juan. He seems to judge that it's unlikely the storm will pose a serious threat to the ship. The second mate sends a final text, reminding Davidson that there are alternative routes that offer protection from the storm. At 1837, Davidson downloads a Bon Voyage system weather package. This is an applied weather technologies navigation product. It uses weather data from the National Hurricane Center and other sources to graphically display forecast weather conditions along a ship's planned route. New BVS weather packages are prepared several times a day, and the ship's crew can download them when they're available. Unbeknownst to Davidson, the package he's downloaded has a time lag in reporting weather information. Typically, the BVS weather packages use data from weather forecasts that are around 5 to 6 hours old. Hurricane forecasts can change rapidly, and forecasts can change drastically in just a few hours. AWT have a more advanced subscription-based routing service that could provide more timely information. The Alfaro's holding company, Tote, hasn't subscribed to this service. BVS also has a tropical update feature, which immediately emails tropical updates to a ship as they're received. The Alfaro doesn't have this feature activated for this voyage. The other major piece of weather reporting equipment the crew relies on is its National Weather Service SAT-C terminal. This doesn't display information with the same graphics as the BVS packages, but it provides up-to-date information. When the NWS and other entities like the National Hurricane Center make tropical cyclone information available, it arrives at the SAT-C terminal straight away. Throughout the voyage, there's a general sense of confusion regarding the status of the hurricane. The crew tends to rely more on the BVS weather forecasts than the SAT-C terminal. It seems that Davidson and his deck officers aren't aware of the inherent latency in the BVS data. They don't seem to be aware that they'd be much better off using the SAT-C terminal instead. Before the ship leaves port, Davidson has dinner with a port engineer on board the Alfaro. He and Davidson discuss the developing tropical storm, but Davidson has no specific concerns about the weather. At 2010, the Alfaro leaves Jacksonville, Florida for San Juan, Puerto Rico, carrying a cargo of 391 shipping containers, 294 trailers and cars, and a crew of 33 people. 28 of the crew are Americans and 5 are Polish nationals. 27 of the Americans on board are regular crew members. The 5 Poles and 1 American are there to carry out conversion work on the ship in preparation for a return to its previous Alaskan route. Captain Davidson plans on using Alfaro's normal direct route to San Juan. Recently, in late August 2015, when Tropical System Erica and Danny were present near the direct route, Davidson had taken Alfaro through an alternative route. This was the route through the Old Bahama Channel. The Old Bahama Channel adds 160 nautical miles to the voyage, but provides protection from the powerful open Atlantic Ocean. At the moment, Davidson thinks he can still take the normal route and pass far enough south of the tropical storm to be safe. But the forecasts are starting to deteriorate. Meteorologists at the National Hurricane Center are also beginning to say that the tropical storm could become a hurricane within the next 36 hours. They've also forecast that it'll head on a southwest trajectory towards the Bahamas. This is directly towards the Alfaro's proposed route. At 0200 on the 30th of September, the National Hurricane Center upgrades Tropical Storm Joaquin again. It's now a Category 1 hurricane and has become Hurricane Joaquin. From this point on, the story of the Alfaro is recorded by the ship's voyage data recorder. This is a recording device that stores communication audio from the ship as well as information about its position, speed, and heading. The audio recording includes a recording of all conversations on the ship's bridge. At 0608, Davidson downloads the latest BVS weather package. Davidson and Chief Mate Stephen Schultz review the information it contains. During their conversation, at one point in reference to the storm, Schultz asks, "Should I be scared?" Davidson takes a relaxed attitude towards things, but shortly after Schultz's question, he does look at the horizon and remark, "Oh, look at that red sky over there. Red in the morning, sailors take warning." They decide to act on the information in the weather report they're looking at. Based on what they see, they expect that if they follow their usual route, they'll be southwest of the hurricane the following day. They consider their choices and decide to schedule a small course alteration to take the ship slightly further south. This doesn't change the route much, but it does make things slightly safer according to the information they're looking at. According to their information, this course change will widen the distance slightly between the ship and the forecast position of the hurricane. At 10:17, Davidson receives a satellite email message from the captain of El Yunque, who's northbound en route to Jacksonville from San Juan. He asks about Davidson's plans and intentions for the storm. Davidson replies that he's watching the storm and has altered course slightly to the south. At 11:24, Davidson downloads another BVS weather package and reviews the information in it. He's still unaware that he's reviewing out-of-date information. Around lunchtime, Davidson sends a detailed email to tote management personnel indicating that he's monitoring the storm. He says that he's adjusted the route and intends to pass south of the storm at a distance of around 65 nautical miles. He anticipates being on the backside of the storm by 0800 the following morning. At 14:14, Davidson and El Faro's second mate, Danielle Randolph, are on the bridge. They hear a VHF Securite broadcast from a Coast Guard aircraft. It's relaying a National Hurricane Center hurricane warning for the Bahamas, and it requests that mariners use extreme caution. Both Randolph and the captain can be heard to say, "Wow." But despite what Davidson heard, he doesn't reconsider his choice of course or review his weather information again. At 16:54, the National Hurricane Center Advisory number 12 is received through the SATC terminal. It contains an up-to-date prediction of the storm's track line and predicts sustained winds of 75 knots with gusts up to 90. No conversation on the bridge seems to acknowledge this information. Instead, at 17:47, Davidson downloads the next BVS weather package via satellite email. He sends this weather package to the bridge computer at 18:51. He then goes to the bridge to discuss the storm and voyage plan again with Chief Mate Schultz, who's on watch. They decide to set another course alteration for the ship. This will take the ship further to the south again, as it passes between the islands of San Salvador and Rum Cay. Schultz suggests extending the course alteration further to sail south of Samana Cay, but Davidson decides this isn't necessary. At 19:43, third mate Jeremy Ream arrives on the bridge to relieve Schultz. He talks to Davidson about the hurricane and says, "I hope it's not worse than the BVS is saying, because they're saying it's more like 85, not 50 wind." He continues, "They're saying it's much more powerful than this is saying right now," pointing to the BVS information. He asks Davidson if he thinks the storm is going to intensify. Davidson seems to ignore what he's saying. Instead, he explains the new route that he and Schultz have picked. He explains the route and says, "We'll be passing clear in the backside of it. Just keep steaming. Our speed is tremendous right now. The faster we're going, the better." At 2000, Joaquin is a Category 3 hurricane with winds estimated at 100 knots. Davidson leaves the bridge, leaving Ream on watch. Later on, at 23:05, Ream calls Davidson on the house phone after reviewing the latest SATC weather report, which arrived at 22:53. He advises Davidson that the hurricane's maximum winds are 100 miles per hour and that the storm is advancing towards their track line. Twice, he recommends that Davidson comes to the bridge to look at the weather report, but Davidson doesn't come. Ream tells Davidson he'll look for more information and then get back to him. At 23:13, after Ream has looked at the forecasts again, they discuss the ship's route one more time. Again, Ream advises Davidson that the weather reports are bad. He informs the captain that according to the SATC weather report, the El Faro will be only 22 miles from the hurricane center at 0400 the next morning. Also, that the winds are 100 with gusts to 120 and strengthening. Ream suggests taking a safer route by altering the course further south from 0200. Davidson, however, still believes the ship will sail south of the storm on the course they're on. He doesn't come to the bridge, and no course alteration is made. Between 23:45 and shortly after midnight, Ream is replaced on watch by second mate Randolph. At 0026, Randolph receives a SAT-C weather update and takes note of the threat posed by the storm. She begins planning an alternate route to the south to avoid the worst of the storm. Her plan, like Ream's, also includes a course change that will begin at 0200. She decides to ring Davidson later to discuss the plan. Shortly afterwards, Randolph also hears on the commercial satellite radio that Joaquin has been upgraded to a Category 3 hurricane. At 0118, the El Faro moves out of the lee of San Salvador Island, which means they no longer have the protection of the island against the force of the wind. When this happens, the crew members on the bridge are paying attention to a rolling action the El Faro has developed. The able seaman on the bridge comments on one particular roll, saying it's the biggest one since I've been up here. Randolph thinks the ship should be well protected while it's between San Salvador Island and Rum Cay. She questions whether they should expect the ship to roll and says, "We're right between the islands, so I'm wondering why we're rolling." The able seaman says, "This is fixing to get interesting." At 0120, Randolph calls Davidson and advises him of Joaquin's upgrade to Category 3 hurricane. She discusses her planned alternative route. Davidson replies and tells her not to alter the planned course and to run it. As the ship continues to pass between San Salvador and Rum Cay, Randolph tells the able seaman on deck to begin Davidson's previously planned course change from 155 to 116 degrees. At this point, the ship develops a sustained wind heel to starboard as a result of the change in direction. The wind heel means the ship is leaning to the right as the wind catches it. The able seaman notices and comments on it to Randolph. The able seaman mentions to Randolph that he's heard a thump somewhere in the ship. They realize that things could be breaking free inside El Faro's superstructure. They don't investigate. Inside Hold 3, a vehicle has broken free from the chain securing a line of vehicles. Approximately 1 hour later, Schultz comes to the bridge to relieve Randolph. He comments to the able seaman that it's hard to tell which way the wind's blowing, huh? Randolph leaves the bridge at 0348. Immediately after getting off watch, she sends 3 short emails to family and friends discussing the hurricane. In one, she says, "There's a hurricane out here, and we are heading straight into it." At 0409, Davidson arrives on the bridge and seems to have a casual attitude towards the hurricane. In reference to the wind heel, he remarks that there's nothing bad about this ride. He also says he was sleeping like a baby. Davidson and Schultz are in conversation. Schultz seems to relax, and they agree that the conditions are similar to every day in Alaska. Davidson also observes that the ship is not rolling, pitching, or pounding. The ship, however, continues to list in the wind and batter its way through the huge waves. At 0440, the ship's chief engineer, Richard Pusseter, calls Schultz on the bridge to report an engine issue related to the list and oil levels. Schultz calls Davidson, who's in the galley, and he returns to the bridge. Davidson speaks to Pusseter and reports to Schultz that he wants to take the list off. The captain says it's just the list, the sumps are acting up, and seems to take the attitude that this is to be expected. Davidson and Schultz make a series of heading adjustments to orient the El Faro's bow nearly directly into the wind. The aim is to reduce the effects of the wind heel on the vessel so the engineers can troubleshoot the problem the starboard list is causing in the engine's oil system. The El Faro's engine is susceptible to oil feed problems in rough conditions. Rough weather causes the oil to move around inside the engine's oil sump. The sump suction valve isn't centered in the sump. It's offset to the starboard side. So if the ship lists to the port side, oil moves away from the valve to the other side of the sump. The valve then fails to draw oil into the engine, and this can stop the engine from working. The rocking motion the ship is experiencing at the moment is making oil slosh around erratically in the sump. At times, the valve is unable to draw in oil. At the moment, the engine is experiencing intermittent problems from the erratic movement of oil. The ship's engine is struggling, but it could actually be a lot worse. If the ship were to get stuck on a heavy portside list, this could mean the sump suction valve can't draw any oil at all. If this happens, the engine might cut out completely. None of the problems with the engine are helped by the fact that the Alfaro departed with a main lube oil sump level of 24.6 inches, 2.4 inches below the recommended operating level of 27 inches. Deeper oil levels might mean the engine is able to draw in oil and run even with a portside list. At 04:45, Davidson downloads the BVS weather package from 2300 the previous day. The information in the weather package is only up to date as far as the National Hurricane Center Advisory number 12, which was received on the SATC terminal at 16:54 the previous day. The data in the BVS weather package is nearly 12 hours old. Around the same time, the Alfaro receives another SATC weather update with National Hurricane Center Advisory number 14. In this advisory, the eye of Hurricane Joaquin is reported to be 11 nautical miles southeast of Alfaro with sustained winds of 105 knots and gusts to 130. At 05:02, Davidson is on the bridge. He says that he's sent the BVS weather package to the bridge. In a sign of the confusion on board, he also mentions that there are conflicting reports about the location of the center of the storm. At 05:43, Davidson takes a phone call reporting suspected flooding in the number 3 cargo hold. He sends Schultz to investigate. Before he leaves the bridge, Schultz takes a call on the house phone and discusses the source and amount of flooding. He also discusses the use of bilge pumps. Davidson takes the phone and gets the report that the bilge pump is running, but the water level is still rising. He also acknowledges that cars have come loose from their chains. The single chain system used to hold multiple cars has failed, and cars are moving freely inside the hold. At 05:52, Davidson takes another call and is informed that the source of the flooding is an open scuttle on deck 2. This is an opening and closing porthole between deck 2 and the cargo hold below. All the scuttles should be closed and locked in storm weather. On the Alfaro, it's easy to miss an open one that's been closed but hasn't been locked. Deck 2 is open to the elements, and as the waves have broken over onto the deck, the water has pooled on the surface. Because the scuttle is on the starboard side and the ship is listing to starboard, water has been pooling over it and then flowing down into the hold below. Right now, the scuttle is underwater. The crew can't access it. Having found the source of the flooding, the crew don't inspect hold 3 any further. It's dangerous to enter the hold if vehicles are loose from their chains. One of these vehicles has struck and ruptured a fire main. The crew don't realize the ship is now flooding from below the waterline. Davidson turns the ship to port to put the wind on the starboard side. The idea is to put the ship into a port list, so the water moves from one side of the deck to the other. This will allow the crew to access the scuttle so they can secure it. At the same time, he also calls Pusseter and directs him to begin transferring ballast from the starboard ramp tank to the port side. This is also to help give the ship a port list. This additional move with the ballast, however, results in the ship developing a deeper port list than the previous starboard list. The decks are now closer to the water. The crew are eventually able to secure the open scuttle at 0600, and the captain tells Pusseter to stop transferring ballast to the port side. The port list has allowed the crew to secure the scuttle, but it's given the ship a bigger list. It's also caused problems in the engine room. The engine's oil suction valve can't draw any oil into the engine. All the oil has flowed to the port side of the oil sump. It's now 0600 and the Alfaro is dangerously close to losing its engine. If the ship loses propulsion, it'll drift and align with the trough of the sea. This will expose the vessel's beam to the full force of the sea and the wind, which will exaggerate the degree of the ship's roll. Down in the ship, the flooding situation is still bad. Even though the scuttle into hold 3 has been secured, the crew have noticed water flooding into the cargo holds through the hold ventilation openings. These are large openings on the side of the ship. Normally, they're well above the waterline. They allow air to move in and out of the holds. With the ship's exaggerated list and the huge waves created by Hurricane Joaquin, water is coming in through these openings. Around this time, Davidson receives a call from the engine room. They're asking him to bring the ship back over to a starboard list to stop the engine malfunctioning. At 0604, Randolph, who is on the bridge, notices a reduction in the engine's RPMs. She asks whether the bridge or the engine room initiated it. Shortly after, Davidson says, "I think we just lost the plant." He also remarks that he doesn't like the list. At 0616, the loss of the engine is confirmed when the engine room calls to report that the engine is completely offline. Davidson calls the engine room and tries to reduce the ship's list by ordering them to shift ballast from the port side to the starboard side. The El Faro is engineless. It's now drifting in the trough of the sea, and it's at the mercy of the waves. By shifting the ballast, Davidson wants to reduce the El Faro's port side list, which will hopefully allow them to get the engine started. Randolph begins to draft a global maritime distress and safety system message in case they need to alert the rescue agencies to the ship's situation. At 0634, there's hope from the engine room. Captain Davidson calls Pusateri, who reports to the bridge that they're getting that boiler back up. They're getting lube oil pressure up. If the crew can get the engine running, they'll be able to point the El Faro into the waves and reduce the amount of water flooding in. They all wait, hoping for more good news. At 0640, Davidson sends Schultz below to check the conditions of hold 3. Then he calls the engine room for an update. But it's bad news. The engineers can't get the ship's engine running, and the crew are left with no control over El Faro. Davidson decides to report the situation to tow personnel on land. He contacts the tow's emergency call center. After having to speak with call center operators for 7 minutes, he's finally connected to tow's designated person ashore. This is a member of staff who can be contacted for assistance in an emergency. Davidson briefs them about the situation on the El Faro. He tells them that the engineers can't get the pressure on the plant, they've got no main engine, they've got a 10 to 15 degree port list, and they're not gaining ground in pumping out the hold. He says they're in survival mode but aren't planning on abandoning the ship. Davidson also tells them he'll be making a distress call to the Coast Guard. He then directs Randolph to activate El Faro's ship security alert system and global maritime distress and safety system. The GMDSS communicates distress to the shoreside rescue agencies. The crew now know they're in a dangerous situation. They don't have control of their ship and they need to get on top of the flooding. What they don't know is that the situation is actually far worse than they think. At 0715, Chief Mate Schultz returns to the bridge and reports that the water level is rising inside the ship. The flooding scuttle has been secured. The ventilation openings do allow water in, but not a dangerous amount. Meanwhile, the bilge pumps are running and emptying water out the ship, but the water level's still rising at a fast rate. The captain realizes that Schultz is saying there must be another source of flooding they don't know about and asks, "Do you know where it's coming from?" Schultz has already asked Chief Engineer Pusateri if he knows what's causing the flooding. Pusateri has identified a ruptured fire main as the source. Schultz relays, the chief said something hit the fire main, got it ruptured hard. The fire main which Schultz is referring to is a large pipe that brings seawater in from the sea through the ship's hull. The fire main is in hold 3. Seawater has been flowing freely into the El Faro through the fire main, perhaps as early as 0530 when flooding was first reported. The bilge pumps are failing because they can't keep up with the flooding coming through the fire main. Schultz has been in hold 3 and says he saw loose cars. He can't confirm the fire main is ruptured because it's deep below dark black water. The conversation continues on the bridge while Davidson and Schultz discuss the El Faro's list. They both agree it's getting worse. At 0716, Davidson calls Pusateri in the engine room to see if he can control the flooding. He asks, "Can you isolate the fire main from down in the engine room?" But Pusateri responds that he can't do anything about the ruptured fire main. there's no way to control the flooding through the fire main without getting direct access to the point where it's leaking. Meanwhile, the Coast Guard Atlantic Area Command Center in Portsmouth, Virginia receives El Faro's GMDSS and SSAS alert messages. TOAD staff are also contacting the center by phone to report El Faro's situation. The Coast Guard Atlantic Area Command Center passes the relevant information over to the Coast Guard District 7 Command Center in Miami, Florida. They begin to plan for a possible rescue operation, but they know it's very difficult to do anything in a hurricane. The list on the ship is increasing and things are looking desperate. At around 0726, Davidson calls both Schultz and Pusseter to tell them he's going to ring the general alarm. He then instructs Randolph to ring the general alarm and wake up the crew. At 0727, the general alarm rings. Abandon ship. Shortly after Davidson gives the order, the crew are set to abandon ship into a hurricane with estimated wind speeds of 115 knots and waves of 6 to 9 meters. They have open-top inflatable life rafts and 2 open-top lifeboats. Survival is unlikely. At 0728, Davidson is still on the bridge with Randolph and the able seaman. The ship continues to list severely. He talks to Schultz on the radio, who's gathering the crew to abandon ship. He says, make sure everybody has their immersion suits and stand by. Get a good head count. Randolph yells a warning about containers in the water. Davidson orders the abandoned ship alarm to be run. About a minute later, Davidson is heard calling out to the bridge, "Bow is down, bow is down." He then calls over the UHF radio for Schultz to get into your rafts, throw all your rafts into the water, everybody get off the ship, stay together. The final actions taken on El Faro are when Davidson tries to rescue the able seaman on the bridge. He can't climb out of the bridge because it's listing so severely. The final words on the El Faro are recorded. The captain repeatedly tells the helmsman not to panic. "Work your way up here. You're okay. Come on. I'm not leaving you. Let's go." The helmsman exclaims, "I need a ladder. I need a line. I need someone to help me." The El Faro's audio recording ends at 0739 and 41 seconds on the 1st of October 2015. The last relayed position of El Faro is 23 degrees 52 minutes north, 74 degrees 02 minutes west, about 35 nautical miles northeast of Crooked Island. The rescue operation is launched, but there's very little anyone can do in a tropical hurricane. On the day the El Faro sinks, a Hercules aircraft from the US Air Force tries to locate the ship through the storm. Nothing is found. The first day passes while the storm continues to rage. The next day, another Hercules aircraft also searches through the storm for the ship. It's joined by 4 helicopters and a fixed-wing patrol aircraft, but nothing is found. Time is running out. On the third day, aircraft continue to search in very challenging weather conditions. They get a glimmer of hope as a helicopter crew manages to locate a life ring from the El Faro, but that's all they find. 4 days after the El Faro sinks, conditions finally improve and a major search operation gets underway. A helicopter crew spots something. One body is found from the El Faro, but it's unrecognizable with its head already swollen to 3 times the normal size from decomposition in the seawater. The crew is unable to recover the body immediately, so they place a locator beacon for later retrieval. The beacon fails and the body is never found again. The search continues. Debris from the El Faro is sighted. Search teams find 1 heavily damaged lifeboat, a deflated life raft, and several unopened survival suits. No bodies of the crew of the El Faro are ever recovered. On the 5th of October 2015, the El Faro is declared lost at sea. The El Faro was eventually discovered on the 31st of October at a depth of around 4,600 meters. The ship is in an upright position and in one piece. The ship's voyage data recorder was eventually found on April the 26th, 2016. With the information on the recorder, investigators were able to piece together events on the day of its sinking. Out-of-date weather information puts the El Faro on a collision course with a hurricane. A vehicle comes loose and ruptures the fire main, flooding the ship from below the waterline. On a starboard heel, water flows into the cargo hold from deck 2 via an open porthole scuttle, which distracts the crew from the main source of flooding. In order to close the scuttle, the ship changes direction and intentionally puts itself in a port heel. The port heel starves the engine of lubricating oil, which stalls the engine. The bilge pumps can't keep up with the flooding in cargo hold 3. The ship takes on more water than it can handle and sinks to the sea floor 4,600 meters below the waterline.
An air and sea search is continuing for possible survivors of the Edmund Fitzgerald.
Fitzgerald was transporting iron ore when it ran into high winds and 25-foot waves.
On the 10th of November 1975, the largest ship ever to sink on the Great Lakes slips beneath the waterline 15 nautical miles northwest of Whitefish Bay, Lake Superior, taking every one of its 29 crew with it. The investigation that follows leaves more questions than answers. One thing is certain, there is not one theory that everyone agrees on. And so you should read through the comments on this video to find more information and decide for yourself which is the most plausible explanation. In November 2023, I released a video on the Edmund Fitzgerald that I've since taken down. I focused on the official investigation, and you were quick to point out that there's a lot more to it. Thank you, I appreciate your input. I made some mistakes, and so I took it as a personal challenge to raise my game. It's impossible to be absolutely certain about the cause of this accident. But in this video, you'll learn what the possible contributing factors are, along with some of the strengths and weaknesses of those theories. I encourage you once again to share your perspective in the comments. This video is sponsored by MyHeritage, more on them later. Our story begins with Ernest McSorley, who was born in Canada. At 11 years old, he moved to the US with his father and stepmother. He spent his teenage years watching ships moving cargo up and down the St. Lawrence River from the Great Lakes to Montreal and Quebec. From a young age, he decided to join their ranks, and at 23, he started his career on the water. The Great Lakes are vast inland lakes. They're the largest freshwater system in the world, containing 80% of America's freshwater and 20% of the world's freshwater. Every year, 120 million tons of cargo are shipped across the Great Lakes. They're the arteries keeping heavy industry afloat, but these lakes are more dangerous than most would assume. They're home to an estimated 6,000 shipwrecks and the graves of nearly 30,000 sailors. At 729 feet long, the Edmund Fitzgerald is designed to be 1 foot less than the maximum limit on the Great Lakes. Construction begins on the 9th of August 1957 and differs from the usual manufacturing process of the time. Traditionally, construction begins by laying down a ship's keel and building the ship up from there. But the Edmund Fitzgerald's hull is built in bulkhead segments which are then joined together. This is one of the first times this style of assembly has ever been used and goes on to become the industry standard. On the 7th of June 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald is launched. At the time of its launch, it's the largest ship on the Great Lakes. It weighs 13,632 tons and is able to carry well over 25,000 tons. It has a crew of 29 and is driven by massive steam turbine engines that push it along at 14 knots. It's named after the president and CEO of Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company, Edmund Fitzgerald, who fits the bill for the $8.4 million ship. At the christening ceremony, Elizabeth Fitzgerald, Edmund's wife, tries to break the champagne bottle across the side of the Fitzgerald. It takes her 3 tries. In recent years, the traditional champagne christening bottle has been thinned down to make it easier to break and avoid the embarrassment and superstition of a failed attempt. As if to reinforce any superstition, it then takes over half an hour to release the ropes, and the ship slides down into the water at a dangerous angle, sending a huge wave crashing to the bank on the opposite side of the shore, drenching people who are watching the launch. In the crowd of almost 15,000 spectators, a 58-year-old man is said to have a heart attack and die on the scene. Superstition points to this series of events as a sign of bad luck for the vessel. Nonetheless, the ship is fitted out and goes into service. The massive steam powerhouse on board makes it one of the fastest freighters at the time. Its pilot house has the most advanced navigational and charting equipment for its time, as well as top-of-the-line radio and communication equipment. The interior fittings are lavish for a cargo ship. 2 guest staterooms, a guest lounge, comfortable captain's office and quarters, laundry room, recreational deck, and the crew staterooms are larger than industry standards. They also have a kitchen with all the amenities to provide meals to the 2 dining rooms on board. 1 luxury dining room for officers and wining and dining the company's guests, and another for the crew. The ship's leased by the Ogilvy Norton Mineral Company for a 25-year contract. Thanks to MyHeritage for sponsoring this video. I've always been curious about my family tree. My late uncle researched my mom's side of the family. When I spoke to my brother, he said he's done some research on my dad's side of the family. So when I saw that I can get a DNA test, I was really curious to see the results. Simply take a swab from your cheek and post it off, then wait for the results. I found some old photos in MyHeritage from people in my family tree that I didn't even know exist. It's amazing to restore and bring them to life. Okay, my DNA results are in. Let's take a look. Right, so 78% English. That's hardly surprising. I would expect some English. 8.5% Eastern European. Okay, wouldn't have expected that. 7.5% or 7.6% Scandinavian. Middle Eastern and Finnish. Rather surprising. View full ethnicity estimate. Okay, so now we can start to see that there is some Irish background there. What I'm really interested to take a look at is my DNA matches. So first things first, my cousin is there. Okay, I didn't know that my cousin had taken a test. That's interesting. There are other people in there, but these are certainly people that I don't know. I mean, parents' first cousin, second cousin. One of the most surprising things for me was that other people in my family have already started building the family tree and taking DNA tests. And while there was only a small percentage of Irish in my DNA, I actually have an Irish passport from Irish ancestors. Does it make you wonder what surprises are waiting for you? If you want to learn more about your family, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen right now to start your 30-day free trial and use my code Waterline Stories for free shipping. On the 22nd of September 1958, the Edmund Fitzgerald makes its maiden voyage, leaving its birthplace in Rouge River, Detroit, Michigan, and sailing to Silver Bay, Minnesota, to retrieve a load of taconite, iron ore. On its very first trip, it sets a Great Lakes tonnage record, the first of many records the ship will set. For well over 10 years, it remains the largest ship on the Great Lakes, carrying cargo loads previously thought to be impossible. Onlookers line up to watch the ship pass through locks and channels. It's nicknamed the Singing Ship because one of its captains, Peter Pulser, would play music on the megaphone to boost morale. He's also known to speak over the megaphone, sharing facts about the ship with onlookers as they pass through the docks. From new construction techniques to being the largest ship built, shaking off superstitions that plagued its launch, carrying bulk loads larger than any other ship, and a skipper with personality, Edmund Fitzgerald develops a reputation and legend that you could compare to SpaceX today. In 1971, 13 years after its maiden voyage, it's refitted from coal firing to oil firing, increasing its speed and endurance. In 1972, Ernest McSorley takes command of the Edmund Fitzgerald. McSorley's already had 9 ships under his command. While he's not at the helm of the Edmund Fitzgerald, he lives with his wife Nellie in Ottawa Hills, a leafy suburb of Ohio, just a stone's throw from Lake Erie, where he and Nellie raised Nellie's 3 children from a previous marriage. During the winter of 1973-74, the Fitzgerald comes out of the water for annual maintenance. Ex-Fitzgerald crew member George Bergner is at the shipyard one day when he overhears a conversation between a shipyard worker and an employee of the Ogilvy Mineral Company who owned the Fitzgerald. In a deposition later in life, Bergner says the conversation is about breaks in the welds that hold the keel in place and that the keel is loose. The Coast Guard know about the breaks in the welds and have approved minor repairs. Bergner also testifies about another conversation he heard between McSorley and crew members on the Fitzgerald. The crew members were digging mud out from the bottom of the Fitzgerald when they noticed the keel was loose again, and they told McSorley. McSorley's response, as Bergner puts it, was to say, "All the son of a bitch has to do is stay together for 1 more year. After that, I don't care what happens to it." McSorley is planning to retire after the season, and so the problem would transfer to the new captain. I'm going to call this the first theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. A cargo ship that's poorly maintained is an accident waiting to happen. If the keel was loose and there were structural problems, then it's possible a severe storm could exacerbate those weak points, causing the Fitzgerald to break apart and sink. The Fitzgerald's sister ship, the Arthur Homer, will later be laid up permanently in 1980 for a structural deficiency, possibly pointing to a similar problem. But now it's 1975 and the Edmund Fitzgerald is in its prime, still in its initial 25-year contract and not even a third of the way through its expected service life. On the 9th of November 1975 at 0830, Edmund Fitzgerald is moored at the Burlington Northern Railroad dock. It begins loading over 26,000 tons of taconite for a trip from Superior, Wisconsin, across Lake Superior and south to Zug Island on the Detroit River. The process of loading is lengthy, as it always is. Towards the end of the season, the Fitz is trying to deliver as much cargo as it can before the winter weather closes in. The loading foreman and deck boss work in tandem to ensure the proper distribution of ore throughout the massive ship's hull. Too much on one side or the other would risk capsizing the ship. Too much along the center line and it could drag its belly out of the port or worse, break its back. Something that's destroyed several ships before it. This could be referred to as the second theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. If the ship is pushing the limits of its cargo capacity, that reduces its freeboard. Freeboard is the volume of spare capacity. A ship always needs some freeboard or it would sink. All ships have a specific freeboard they shouldn't go over. If the Fitzgerald is overloaded, then that reduces its freeboard, and under normal weather conditions, it might not matter. The National Weather Service has been tracking a large November storm, but predicts it will pass south of Lake Superior. By 14:15, 6 hours later, the crew hauls in the shorelines and Edmund Fitzgerald departs Lake Superior en route to Detroit with 26,116 tons of taconite pellets. After loading, the crew on the Fitzgerald fasten the hatch covers on deck, sealing the cargo holds. Some hatch covers have seen better days, but overall, they're in good working order. As they pass out the breakwater, Janice Armagust and her 2 children stand on the shore. The children are hoping to catch a glimpse of their dad, Michael Armagust, the 3rd mate. He's not on deck. Janice yells to a deckhand asking where Mike is, and he responds that Mike's below deck. Janice and the children wave goodbye to the ship and watch as it sails out onto Lake Superior. The deckhand continues to go around and fasten deck hatches as needed for the calm weather of the day. Deck hatches is the 3rd theory for the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. As with all the theories of why the Edmund Fitzgerald sank, the deck hatch theory is heavily debated. In many photographs of the Edmund Fitzgerald, not all the hatch dogs are secure. This has led some to believe that it's common practice not to secure all the dogs while underway. On the one hand, not all photographs are taken when the ship is sailing, and so how would we know if it's common practice to leave them undogged when the ship is underway? On the other hand, captains of other ships have used the same types of hatch covers and dogs without them failing because the weight of the hatch cover itself is actually enough to seal the hatch, even if a few hatch dogs aren't secure. It's also possibly in the interest of the ship's owners to shift the blame to the crew members in order to secure the insurance payout. There are two main questions. Were all the hatch dogs secure? And if they weren't secure, would that have allowed enough water into the hull to sink the ship? On board the Edmund Fitzgerald, all is going well as they sail into the late afternoon. Unexpectedly, the barometer quickly drops and it becomes clear that the storm will hit Lake Superior. At 16:30, another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, departs Two Harbors, Minnesota, just ahead of the Edmund Fitzgerald and on a parallel course. At the time of its construction, the slightly older Anderson is shorter than Fitzgerald. After a refit, it's lengthened to be slightly longer than the Fitzgerald, but notably slower. Edmund Fitzgerald soon closes the lead that the Anderson has. By midnight, the two ships are within range of each other and begin to communicate. Both ships are fitted with weather observation and reporting equipment used by the National Weather Service. The two skippers decide to hug the Canadian shore to shelter from the storm. As they track the storm, they realize it'll catch them before they reach the safety of Whitefish Bay. Being the faster ship, Edmund Fitzgerald passes the Anderson, but both ships are within radio and radar range, and so they speak regularly about the deteriorating weather. The wind has picked up to 40 knots and waves are easily 10 to 12 feet in height. The captain of the Anderson, Bernie Cooper, contacts the Fitzgerald and shares his prediction that once the storm progresses, the wind will likely shift by 180 degrees. As day breaks, the ships approach the islands outside of Whitefish Bay. By 1400, the ships have passed through the eye of the storm, and as predicted, the wind shifts from southerly to northerly, blowing at a strong 42 knots. Snow begins to fall heavily on the lake. The Anderson loses sight of the Fitzgerald. As conditions worsen, they can only see each other on radar. Right here, the story starts to take diverging courses. These scenarios could be viewed in isolation or in combination with one another. Everyone knows the story and has an opinion, and each is valid. My best guess is that the exact cause of the sinking is not one, but a combination of causes. But which combination? At 1500, the Anderson's Captain Cooper brings the ship further to the east to avoid the 6-fathom shoal. Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald doesn't follow the Anderson into deeper water. Under normal conditions, the 6-fathom shoal is about 36 feet deep. The loaded draft of the Anderson is around 26 feet. The draft of a ship is the depth of the keel below the waterline. The Fitzgerald's draft is 25 feet under normal load. It's always a good idea to avoid shallow shoals, particularly in bad weather. If the Fitzgerald hits the shoal, it could damage the integrity of the ship. In combination with a heavy load and bad weather, they could potentially break apart. At 15:30, Captain McSorley on the Fitzgerald radios the Anderson and says that they've lost a railing on the deck as well as a few vent covers. They're taking on water. This looks to me like the fourth theory to explain the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. McSorley says he's reducing speed so that the Anderson can catch up. Captain Cooper acknowledges, then asks if the pumps are on, and Captain McSorley confirms they're both running. The Anderson is now 17 nautical miles behind the Fitzgerald. Both ships are about 4 or 5 hours from the safety of Whitefish Bay. Between 1530 and 1620, Captain Cooper watches his radar as the Fitzgerald sails further towards the 6-fathom shoal, then passes directly over it. 6-fathom shoal is well known by local skippers, but the depths are not very well documented on the chart. In fact, there are discrepancies between Canadian and American charts at the time. It's possible the Fitzgerald scrapes its hull on the shoal, and in the heavy weather, a wave hits the ship at the same time, disguising the contact with the shoal. This is theory number 5 for the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. At 16:20, less than an hour after their last contact, the Anderson receives another call from the Fitzgerald. Captain McSorley says that both his radars aren't working and he's driving blind. He asks Captain Cooper if he can assist in navigating using the Anderson's radar. Captain McSorley doesn't mention to the Anderson that they ran aground or scraped the shoal, and he continues to sail the ship into deeper water after passing over the shoal. During the investigation after the Fitzgerald sinks, many engineers and experts are interviewed. All the expert witnesses agreed that the Fitzgerald would have sunk quickly if it had made contact with the shoal. None of the experts at the time thought the ship would have been able to continue sailing as far as it did. I've been on a boat navigating sandbanks, and we made light contact with the ground. I know it's a different scale, but when we made contact, I could feel the shudder and a distinct drop in momentum as it made contact. I would think an experienced captain like McSorley would also notice and report if he'd made contact with the shoal. There are several forums that refer to divers who found red paint on the shoal, but no matter how hard I searched for an original quote, I could only find comments in forums and not an original article about that claim. I did find articles about the official search of the shoals that found no evidence of grounding on the shoal. By 16:30, it's getting dark, and along with the snow, visibility might as well be zero. The winds are 58 knots from the north. At 1700, Captain Cooper on the Anderson radios to say they're 15 nautical miles astern of the Edmund Fitzgerald. It's taken 1.5 hours to close 2 nautical miles. They're still assisting with navigation using their radar as they slowly close the distance. At 17:20, Captain McSorley calls the Coast Guard station at Grand Marais, Michigan. He's trying to get a fix off the beacon at Whitefish Point, but isn't picking up the signal. Without his radar and with such low visibility, this is one of his only ways of navigating. A Great Lakes registered pilot is on board the Swedish vessel Avafors heading north from Whitefish Point. He replies to the Fitzgerald to say that Whitefish Point Light is operating, but the radio beacon is not working. The Fitzgerald is navigating with very little information. The radio channel remains open for a moment, and the pilot aboard Avafors overhears the Fitzgerald master say to the crew, "Don't allow nobody on deck," followed by some conversation about a vent, which isn't clear. The Fitzgerald's master then tells the Avafors that the Fitzgerald has a bad list, has lost both radars, and is taking heavy seas over the deck in one of the worst seas he's ever encountered. The list confirms that the Fitzgerald has already taken on water. It could be that the keel has separated and the faulty welds are letting water in from below the waterline. Perhaps the deck hatches aren't secure and water has found its way into the cargo hatches, which are possibly carrying more load than is safe in these conditions. The damaged vent cover could have let in enough water to make the ship list. Or maybe the Fitzgerald has run aground and torn a hole in its hull, allowing water to seep in. Now we come to the sixth theory of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. The seas are growing, with 25-foot waves crashing over the decks of both the Anderson and the Fitzgerald. A phenomenon known as the Three Sisters is reported near the locations of Edmund Fitzgerald and the Arthur Anderson. A series of at least 2, possibly 3, larger than normal rogue waves hits the two ships. Captain Cooper on the Anderson records 2 waves that are around 30 to 35 feet at 1900. He notes in his ship's log that the wave action has caused damage to the deck gear on his ship. It's possible that the first wave floods the deck of the Fitzgerald with a large amount of water. If it's not completely drained before the second wave hits, it could drive the bow under. Or it's possible that the Fitzgerald rides high, straddles either 1 or 2 waves, and flexes mid-ship, splitting the ship and causing it to sink quickly. At 1900, the Fitzgerald is only about an hour from the safety of Whitefish Bay. The first mate on the Anderson calls Captain McSorley to inform him that the Fitzgerald is approximately 10 nautical miles ahead and about 15 nautical miles from Whitefish Bay. 10 minutes later, at 1910, the Anderson picks up a contact on its radar further to the south. He calls McSorley and says there is a target 9 miles ahead. A target on radar is another vessel. McSorley asks if he's going to clear, to which the mate responds, yes, he's going to pass to the west of you. The Fitzgerald responds with a simple, well, fine. The mate then asks, how are you holding out with your problems? And McSorley says, we are holding our own. There are two areas of high wind over Lake Superior with speeds exceeding 43 and 40 knots. The southeastern part of the lake, where the Fitzgerald is, experiences the highest winds. The waves are nearly 20 feet high with winds over 50 miles per hour. The Edmund Fitzgerald is on the eastern edge of the high wind area. Captain Cooper on the Anderson records northwest winds of 57 miles per hour with gusts up to 86 miles per hour. Conditions are treacherous. Then the snow subsides and visibility opens up significantly. The crew on the Anderson searches for the lights of the Fitzgerald but can't see them. Captain Cooper worries that the Fitzgerald has lost power and tells his crew to look for a silhouette. At 19:20, only 10 minutes after their last radio call, the Anderson's radar is picking up 3 targets, but not the Edmund Fitzgerald. Captain Cooper calls the Fitzgerald over the radio with no response. He calls again. Soon after, he calls the Coast Guard station to report his loss of radio contact with the Fitzgerald. An hour later, at 20:32, Cooper calls the Coast Guard again, saying he is very concerned about the safety of the Fitzgerald. At 2100, almost 2 hours after their last contact, the Anderson officially declares the Fitzgerald missing. The Coast Guard initiates a search. They contact Rescue Coordination Center Cleveland, Ohio, who dispatches a search and rescue aircraft from Traverse City. Then they ask ships in the area to look for the Fitzgerald. More than one ship is asked to alter course or double back to search the last known location of the Fitzgerald. But they decline because of the risk to their ship and crew, which is their first priority. The Coast Guard don't immediately dispatch a search and rescue boat because of the high winds and rough seas. They ask Captain Cooper on the Anderson to come about and conduct a search. Captain Cooper is hesitant. He's concerned that the Fitzgerald has been lost to the storm his crew have just survived. After some convincing, he reluctantly agrees and turns the Anderson around to sail back into the storm to search for the Fitzgerald. Night turns to day. At 0800 the next morning, the Anderson spots a piece of lifeboat, then another. Aircraft and rescue vessels join to search a vast area, but none of the 29 crew members are found, dead or alive. They find pieces of life jackets, oars, a lifeboat, air tanks, and a heaving line, but no personal effects and no bodies. The damage to the lifeboats indicates they were wrenched from the ship. They weren't launched. A few days later, on the 14th of November, a side scan sonar identifies 2 large objects on the bottom of Lake Superior. They scan it several times but can't determine if it's the Fitzgerald. The search is called off. In May of the following year, the Navy brings out their Curve 3 underwater ROV equipped with an underwater camera. They get visual confirmation that the wreck is in fact the Edmund Fitzgerald. Sitting at the bottom in 530 feet of water, it's split into 2 sections, with an enormous debris field spread out between the 2 sections. They don't find any bodies. Four adventurous sailors' lives are painfully cut short during a fatal 30-day voyage when a Beneteau 40.7 yacht begins to take on water. Beneteau is a French sail and powerboat manufacturer with factories in France and the United States. The holding company, Group Beneteau, also owns boat brands like Jeanneau and Lagoon. The company is founded in 1884 by shipwright Benjamin Beneteau in Creux-de-Vie, France, to construct sailing trawlers. During the 1960s, Benjamin's grandchildren Annette Beneteau-Roux and André Beneteau introduced a range of fiberglass boats. Their primary production site in France is spread across 5 factories in the Vendée region. They also have a US factory in Marion, South Carolina, which starts manufacturing in 1986. In 2006, Beneteau builds Cheeky Rafiki at the shipyard in Saint-Hilaire-de-Ries in France. The yacht is 39 feet long, has a beam of just under 13 feet, weighs just over 15 tons, can accommodate 12 crew, and sails under 800 square foot of canvas. The keel is attached to the hull using 10 bolts, 9 of which are 24 millimeters in diameter and 1 is 14 millimeters. Construction meets the CE seaworthiness classification of Category A Ocean and is inspected by Bureau Veritas. Cheeky Rafiki is equipped with an Iridium 9555 satellite phone enabling voice communication and data transfer, including emails. The Iridium satellite system is made up of 66 LEO or low Earth orbit satellites providing global communication. The satellite phone operates on a pay-as-you-go system. It's normally turned off to save battery life. The Iridium connection is used to download weather data, which can be viewed using UGRIB software, which plots the weather onto your digital navigation charts. GRIB is a binary data that's used to send large volumes of weather information in small data packets. The yacht originally bought by a private owner in 2006. In 2007, it runs aground twice. The owner takes the yacht out of the water to rest on its keel while it's inspected and repaired. Sometimes a keel is inspected while the yacht is in the sling, where you can see if the keel is separated from the hull or twisted, which can't always be seen if the hull is resting on the keel. Over the coming years, it has at least 4 more light groundings. It's important to know that grounding a vessel is not uncommon. If you do a sailing course, you'll be put in a position where the skipper grounds the yacht on purpose to teach you how to refloat it. Of course, there's a difference between lightly grounding a yacht on purpose and running aground at speed. In 2011, Stormforce Coaching takes over the management of Cheeky Rafiki. Stormforce Coaching is a company based in England, focusing on training sailors. The yacht takes part in the ARC Atlantic Rally for Cruises in 2011 and 2013, spending some time in the Caribbean after each event. It's due for its next inspection on the 18th of March 2014, but it's still in the Caribbean. Stormforce Coaching asks the YSDA, or Yacht Designers and Surveyors Association, to grant an extension to allow the inspection to be completed when the yacht is back in the UK. Unlike private yachts, all commercial yachts must be inspected at specific intervals to maintain their commercial registration. The YDSA passes the request to the MCA, or Maritime Coast Guard Agency, who confirm that no extension is permitted under the Small Commercial Vessel Code. Because of the cost of completing the survey while in the Caribbean, it's not inspected, and Cheeky Rafiki's Category 2 commercial coding expires. In the spring of 2014, after completing the Antigua Sailing Week regatta in the Caribbean, Cheeky Rafiki prepares to sail back to Southampton in England. The skipper, Andrew Bridge, and Douglas Innes, the director of Stormforce, discuss the passage plan and weather reports for the transatlantic voyage. Andrew Bridge is 22 years old from the UK. In 2011, he does an internship with Stormforce Coaching. He has certificates from the Royal Yachting Association, or RYA, including Yachtmaster Ocean Certificate of Competence from October 2013. He has a commercial endorsement and cruising instructor qualification. And he's completed the International Sailing Federation Offshore Safety course. He's got around 22,500 miles of sailing under his belt, with nearly 5,000 miles as skipper. His ocean voyages include a trip from the Azores to Cork as the first mate. And he skippered Cheeky Rafiki in the Atlantic Rally for Cruises in 2013 for the transatlantic race from Las Palmas to St. Lucia. Douglas Innes is the principal of Stormforce Coaching. He started training sailors as an RYA instructor in 1993. He sets up Stormforce Coaching in 2001. He's a RYA Yachtmaster instructor and examiner with a raft of qualifications. With over 100,000 miles of yachting experience, he's taken part in 2 ARC transatlantic ocean races. Innes is in the UK and helping Bridge plan the voyage, but won't be sailing with the crew. During the planning, they decide to attempt a non-stop crossing, but they can divert to the Azores for additional supplies if they need to. They agree that communication is limited to emails unless there's an emergency. Bridge sets sail from Antigua on the 4th of May 2014. Cheeky Rafiki has a crew of 4 experienced sailors on board: Paul Goslin, Steve Warren, James Mail, and skipper Andrew Bridge, all from the UK. James Mail is 22. He's an RYA keelboat instructor. He's working towards his Yachtmaster Offshore certificate and holds an Advanced Powerboat certificate with a commercial endorsement. He's interning with Stormforce Coaching. Paul Goslin is 56, has sailed around 2,500 miles, been the skipper on 11 yachting holidays, and done 2 crossings of the North Sea. Stephen Warren is 52 with 3,500 miles at sea. He skippered charter vessels on holiday and also crewed on a yacht sailing from Hamble to Las Palmas. Paul and Stephen have completed the RYA Coastal Skipper course and are working towards their Yachtmaster Offshore certificate. The voyage across the Atlantic is scheduled to take 30 days and cover 3,600 nautical miles. Throughout the crossing, Bridge frequently emails Innes using the satellite phone. On Monday the 5th of May at 0834, Innes receives an email from Bridge on Cheeky Rafiki informing him their current position is 19 degrees 0 minutes north, 61 degrees 28 minutes west. He also mentions they've encountered a light patch and have picked up a 5th crew member, a bird which has been sitting on the coach roof for most of the night. Bridge asks Innes for any weather routing information. At 17:15, Cheeky Rafiki gets a response from Stormforce Coaching. They send an email saying you need to head east and north for the next 2 days. There's a band of Southwest 4 coming in Tuesday afternoon to the east, but it should fairly quickly settle to East 4. In the meantime, endure the light conditions. The number 4 refers to the Beaufort wind scale, which means a moderate breeze between 11 and 16 knots. On Tuesday the 6th of May at 12:24, Stormforce receives a daily email from Cheeky Rafiki. They mention that the wind has been light and are heading north. They still have a range of 900 to 1,000 miles on the engine if the wind keeps dying. In the email, Bridge reports that it looks as if they will have to visit the Azores for supplies and says any further weather information would be great. Innes replies, "Go north. Do not pass go. Go north. Do not collect 200 pounds. Go north." On Monday the 12th of May at 17:50 hours, Stormforce receives another email from Cheeky Rafiki. The email says they've been at sea for 9 days now and are all faring well. The winds have been gentle whilst routing northwards, passing the east coast of Bermuda, and have now turned east, heading for home and completing their first 1,000 miles. They've sailed almost a third of their journey. They give a position update. At this point, when they turn east, they'll be heading into the North Atlantic Ocean, putting distance between themselves and their closest major landmass. On Saturday the 10th of May, Cheeky Rafiki sends an update. They've sailed 176 miles in the last 24 hours. They mention hitting a big wave hard and joke that the jolt from the wave fixed the stereo. The average sailing speed of a yacht is around 5 or 6 nautical miles per hour, which is between 125 and 144 miles every 24 hours. A larger yacht with more sail and a longer hull would expect to sail slightly faster, and a smaller one slightly slower. Over the coming days, regular updates pass between Stormforce in the UK and Cheeky Rafiki, which is making steady progress. On Thursday the 15th of May at 20:22, Stormforce receives an urgent email from Cheeky Rafiki. "We're taking on a lot of water both yesterday and today. Today it seems to be worse. I think the starboard water tank has split, so it's drained. We've checked the hull and seacocks for damage but can't see any. I'll take a swim to check the hull again when the weather improves, which will be in about 24 hours. We're currently monitoring the situation. Porter is 900 miles away. Our position is 38 degrees 38 minutes north, 48 degrees 59 minutes west. Any thoughts from your end? I'll check email in 2 hours. Stormforce responds at 20:46. Is the water fresh or salty? That will tell you most of what you need to know. They then send another email only moments later at 20:48. Loosen straps for the life raft. Check EPIRB and sat phone are accessible, etc. Have everything ready in event of the worst case scenario. These emails are never opened. At 22:21, Andrew Bridge has a 55-second satellite phone call with Douglas Innes, followed by a 2-minute 46-second return call on a different mobile. During the call, Bridge describes the situation, stating that water ingress is worse than before and the water is salty. The engine bilge is dry and they can't find the source of the leak. At 22:30, Stormforce sends another email to Cheeky Rafiki saying, I need your position. This email is never opened. At 22:33, Innes attempts to call Cheeky Rafiki via satellite phone, but the call is redirected to voicemail. On Friday the 16th of May at 03:30, Innes and Bridge have a 1-minute and 42-second satellite phone call. Innes is having difficulty understanding what Bridge is saying, but he manages to make out Bridge saying, "This is getting worse." At this time, Cheeky Rafiki's approximate position is 38 degrees 37 minutes north, 48 degrees 6 minutes west. Bridge hasn't worked out where the water's coming from. After several groundings, a recent ocean crossing, and the jolt from hitting a large wave that fixed the stereo, the keel is now loose. Every wave that rolls through, every change of course puts a little more pressure on the keel bolts holding the lead keel in place. Like bending a paperclip back and forth, it's only a matter of time. After the phone call, Innes contacts Her Majesty's Coast Guard to alert them to the situation. Cheeky Rafiki has lost connection to the satellite and is not responding to emails or phone calls. The yacht's last known coordinates are within Boston Coast Guard's area of operation. Rescue Coordination Center, RCC Boston, scrambles an HC-130 long-range surveillance aircraft to the location of the crew's last recorded EPIRB signal. An EPIRB is an emergency position indicating radio beacon. Flying over the last known location, the Lockheed C-130 Hercules can spot only debris in the water. On the 17th of May at around 1400, the container ship Maersk Cure spots the upturned hull of a small boat which they believe could be Cheeky Rafiki. Rough weather prevents them from launching the ship's lifeboat or rescue boat to get a closer look. On the 18th of May at 0900, the US Coast Guard calls off the search. RCC Boston calculates the estimated survivability of the crew members. Assuming they're dressed in full foul weather sailing gear, are immersed to the neck in water, and wearing a personal flotation device, the estimated survival time is 12 to 15 hours. On the 20th of May, the UK government intervenes and asks the US Coast Guard to continue the search. Once again, RCC Boston coordinates the second attempt. The first search and rescue assets arrive in the vicinity of the boat later that day. A wider scale search is coordinated between the US Coast Guard, US Air Force, Royal Canadian Air Force, and the Royal Air Force. 9 merchant vessels join the US Coast Guard cutter Vigorous, US ship Oscar Austin, and numerous private yachts. On the 23rd of May at 1500, USS Oscar Austin's helicopter locates an upturned yacht hull. The vessel launches a small boat with a surface swimmer who positively identifies the hull as Cheeky Rafiki. The swimmer also confirms that its life raft is still on board in its usual position. On the 24th of May at 0200, the search and rescue effort is called off. An investigation is immediately launched by the Marine Accident Investigation Board, or MAIB. Inspectors examine 4 other Beneteau 40.7 yachts. They notice that all show signs of detachment of the keel from the hull around the aft end towards the back of the keel from previous groundings. 2 of these 4 yachts also show signs of detachment in the forward section. On the 5th of December 2016, Stormforce Principal Douglas Innes is charged with 4 counts of manslaughter by gross negligence. Innes pleads not guilty, and the jury finds him not guilty of manslaughter. but they do deliver a verdict of unsafe vessel operation and not meeting the Merchant Shipping Act's requirements. The court concludes that Stormforce neglected maintenance in order to save money, making the yacht unseaworthy. The Crown Prosecution Service claims that even before the yacht set sail from Antigua, it had corroded or broken keel bolts. On the 11th of May 2018, Innes receives a suspended sentence. Stormforce is fined £50,000, which forces them to liquidate all their assets and file for bankruptcy. A close friend of mine and I owned a 24-foot sailboat in the UK at the time. In 2018, we sent it to a marine engineer to inspect the keel bolts and protect them from seawater under a coating of epoxy, as I'm sure many yacht owners did after Cheeky Rafiki capsized. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more videos from this channel without any ads, please consider joining our Patreon. The link is in the description. You can join for free or select a membership with benefits ranging from ad-free videos through to early access and live Q&A calls. I look forward to meeting you there. When the Titanic sank in April 1912, it instantly became one of the most famous maritime disasters ever recorded. But there are other stories of Titanic proportion. And for Japan, that is the story of the Toyomaru train ferry. But when you research the story, you can see that there are facts written into Wikipedia and other websites that, like the Toyomaru, simply don't hold water. By the early 1900s, rail has become a major part of transporting people and cargo around Japan. Networks of rail lines join stations all over the country. However, Japan is an archipelago made up of a series of islands and not connected by bridges or tunnels. Trains arriving in port towns would disembark their passengers and cargo would be transferred to a ship to make the crossing from one island to another. This time-consuming and costly process is replaced by train ferries designed to allow a train to roll onto the ferry in one port and directly onto the train tracks at the next port. While this speeds up the process, there are several factors to consider. A train is not a light piece of equipment, and so it needs to be balanced quite carefully. When a train rolls onto a ferry, it's almost impossible to place the train on the lowest deck of the ferry. This means the center of gravity is pushed upwards. A higher center of gravity is less stable than a low center of gravity. In order to combat this, ferry designers created sea doors. These doors are lowered to allow the trains to roll onto a lower deck and then closed again for the voyage. Seals on such large doors that double as a ramp for the trains are inherently weak, which means it's possible for water to leak in when exposed to rough weather. It's near impossible to compartmentalize the decks when a train runs the full length of a ferry. If water gets into the ferry, it'll have free run of the entire deck. The weight of a train is difficult to completely stabilize. If a train shifts its position, it would break any type of restraints used to hold it in place. Of course, everything is done to stabilize the trains. Brakes are applied and trains are chained to the deck. Passengers and cargo remain in the train for a crossing, although on a long voyage the passengers can leave the train and stretch their legs and walk around the ship. The Toyomaru launched in November 1947. She is 389 feet long and 52 feet wide at her beam, and she has a gross registered tonnage of 3,898 gross tons. Gross registered tonnage is a ship's internal volume. Each registered ton is 100 cubic feet. She's a steam-powered train ferry owned by Japanese National Railways and built by Mitsubishi. The Toyomaru covers a voyage from Aomori to Hakodate, which is about a 4.5-hour passage. She can accommodate 1,128 passengers with a further 120 crew. On the 26th of September 1954, the Toyomaru makes her first crossing of the day from Aomori to Hakodate and arrives safely at 1100. She's scheduled to return to Aomori later that day at 1440. However, Typhoon Marie is expected to reach the Tsugaru Strait at around 1700. Another smaller vessel cancels its departure on the same route, and all the vehicles and passengers are transferred to the sturdier Toyomaru. This delays the departure of the Toyomaru, which would have completed its journey to Aomori before the typhoon hit. As the weather picks up, at 15:10 the captain decides to delay the departure. The passengers wait patiently in their carriages and in the terminal for the storm to dissipate. By 1700, the worst of the weather has passed and the captain prepares to depart. The train ferry departs the port at 1839 with almost 1,331 people and fully laden with cargo, including cars and train carriages. The captain has mistimed his departure because Typhoon Marie has not passed. It's merely slowed down. Now that the Toyomaru is out of the port and sailing into the bay, the typhoon picks up steam and the sea state grows with the wind strengthening from the south-southeast. The captain has a choice to make. He can attempt to make the crossing, but with the weather picking up, he's sure that in deeper water the conditions will be far worse. He could try and run back to port, but in the current sea state it's too dangerous. The ferry would likely smash into the port in the rolling waves. That means his best option is to stay in the shallow bay, cast anchor and ride out the storm. At 19:01, the Toyomaru drops anchor in the bay outside the port of Hakodate. But the anchor does not bite, and so the Toyomaru leaves the anchor down and motors forward slowly to hold the bow into the waves and pointing towards the oncoming swell and wind. For a number of hours, the ferry rolls precariously over the swell and waves. The wind howls and the passengers huddle in their carriages. Every time the ship rolls over the crest of a wave, the train carriages test their restraints. The passengers can feel the weight of the train carriages shift slightly. The action of the wave and the wind is causing the ferry to start taking on water, which runs into the lower decks. At 2200, the anchor breaks free and the Toyomaru begins to drift. The captain tries to navigate the ship into deeper water, but the engine compartments have taken on water and the steam engines are snuffed. At 22:26, the Toyomaru runs aground on the rocks of Nane Beach and the captain sends out a mayday call. The sea swell and gale force winds push her beam on between the wind and the rocks. The beam of a ship is the length of her side. This is the worst position for a ship because in swell and waves it rolls uncontrollably from side to side with every wave that hits. Under constant pressure from the sea state, the rail cars break their restraints. Passengers are crushed as the carriages topple. As the weight of the carriages shifts, they further destabilize the ferry. At 22:43, the Toyomaru capsizes. She sinks a few hundred meters off the shore of Hakodate with 1,331 people on board. 1,172 people lose their lives, including the captain of the Toyomaru. If you read the articles about this accident, you'll see that the description is slightly different from what I have put forward here. The commonly reported sequence of events is that the engines are snuffed by water and then the captain decides to beach the vessel. If the engines are snuffed first, then the captain has already lost control and he can't take a decision to beach because he has no engine to propel the ferry towards the beach. The ferry is at the mercy of the sea. In addition to that, I find it hard to believe any captain would take a decision to beach such a vessel on purpose. The ferry has a V-shaped hull. The captain would be very aware that this shape of hull would cause the ferry to topple if beached. She could not stand upright on a V-shaped hull. If he beached her on purpose, he signed her death warrant. Despite what's written in Wikipedia and other reports, the final say is given to the second mate, who's the highest rank to survive. In his testimony about the incident, he says, "We put the anchor down outside the breakwater, but we could not fix the anchor. We ran the engine at full speed against the wind, but both engines stopped at 10 o'clock. The ship was beaten by the rough waves and hit rocks at 10:26. The ship turned over about 7 to 8 minutes after that." As a result of this accident, a decision was taken to develop the Saikan Tunnel, which is the world's longest undersea tunnel beneath the Tsugaru Strait. The Saikan Tunnel runs almost 34 miles and is 790 feet below sea level. It opened on the 13th of March 1988, which marked the same day for the final crossing of a Seikan Railroad ferry boat. The Japanese press labeled the Toyomaru the Titanic of Japan. Icy water floods the main deck, and in a matter of 30 seconds, the ferry lists 30 degrees to port. In the late 1970s, Townsend Torreson commissioned the design and construction of 3 new identical ferries for its Dover to Calais route and took delivery in 1980. The Spirit-class ships were named Spirit of Free Enterprise, Herald of Free Enterprise, and Pride of Free Enterprise. Herald of Free Enterprise entered service on the 29th of May 1980. A triple-screw ro-ro or roll-on, roll-off passenger and vehicle ferry built in Bremerhaven, Germany. The ship was powered by 3 8,000 horsepower 12-cylinder diesel engines, allowing for a top speed of 22 knots. To remain competitive with other ferry operators on the route, Townsend Torreson commissioned the Herald's design for fast loading and unloading and for rapid acceleration. The Herald had 8 decks labeled A to H from top to bottom, with decks D, E, and G serving as vehicle decks. E deck was the upper vehicle deck, accessed through a weathertight door at the bow and an open portal at the stern. G deck was the main vehicle deck, with watertight doors at the bow and stern. The ship had clamshell bow doors with 2 panels that spread open sideways instead of a visor door that raises upwards. The clamshell doors were below the bow, making it difficult for someone at the bridge to see if they were open or closed. At Dover and Calais, vehicles could be loaded and unloaded onto E and G decks simultaneously using 2 ramps, one on top of the other, called double-deck link spans. The lower ramp led to the main G deck and the upper ramp to E deck. The Herald had an enclosed superstructure above the bulkhead deck for the passengers. For safety and stability, it had weathertight doors to prevent water pouring in from the side exposed to the weather. And it had watertight doors and bulkheads in place where water could potentially accumulate on either side. The bow had watertight inner and outer doors, while the stern had only an outer watertight door. The bow doors were hydraulically operated, opening by swinging out to either side and being stowed against the side of the ship. The inner bow doors acted as an additional barrier against water entering the main vehicle deck. They opened by tilting down and closed onto a watertight seal in the bulkhead, which is a reinforced cross-section of the ship. The Herald was well supplied with life-saving equipment, and the crew trained for emergency procedures to evacuate the ship within 30 minutes. The Herald not only conformed with, but carried equipment in excess of statutory requirements. The Herald and its 2 sister ships were built for the Dover to Calais run. They were fitted with powerful engines. The ro-ro ferries were capable of rapid acceleration to make the channel crossing at high speed. They were also designed to disembark their passengers and vehicles rapidly, then quickly embark passengers and vehicles for the return journey. After the ships went into service, Townsend Torreson was awarded a new route between Dover and the Belgian port of Zeebrugge. The 3 Spirit-class ships took on this new route. But the link span used for loading at Zeebrugge was not designed for the Spirit-class vessels. It had a single-deck ramp, which meant decks E and G had to be loaded one after the other rather than at the same time. And the ramp couldn't be raised high enough to reach E deck. So the vessel had to take on ballast to lower the bow into the water, sinking the ship enough that the ramp could reach deck E. Because the ship could only load 1 deck at a time, only 2 deck officers were assigned for loading and unloading compared to 3 officers at Calais or Dover. And so the duties of the deck officers at Zeebrugge were organized differently from their duties at Calais. On the Dover to Calais run, the ships were manned by a complement of 4 officers, a master, 2 chief officers, and a second officer. But for the Dover to Zeebrugge route, only 3 officers were employed, a master, 1 chief, and a second officer. When the Herald took on the Zeebrugge service, the total complement of deck officers, grouped into 5 shift rotations, was reduced from 15 to 10 officers. The extra 5 crew were given positions elsewhere around the fleet. When the Herald returned to the Calais service, instead of its original extra 5 officers returning to the ship, officers from ships undergoing maintenance were assigned to the Herald. Because of this system, most of the temporary officers only needed to cover a few duties. Their main concern was to get the ship loaded and to sail safely between Dover and Calais. They became less involved with inspecting equipment or organizing the vessel because that wasn't part of their duties, which meant maintenance, safety checks, crew training, and smooth running of the vessel all suffered. On the 6th of March 1987, towards the end of winter, the Herald starts loading in Zeebrugge Harbour. The Herald's ballast tanks at the bow are flooded to lower the bow while they load E-deck. At 1740, E-deck loading is complete, so they transfer the ramp to G-deck. The chief officer orders the ballast tank to be pumped out to raise the bow. It'll take over an hour to pump out the water and bring the vessel back to its normal trim. The Friday night Zeebrugge to Dover trip is fairly full. Many of the passengers on board are returning to Dover. The total passenger count is 459 people. With 80 crew members, the total head count is 539 people listed in the ship's manifest. There are 81 cars, 3 coaches, and 47 cargo trucks. The Herald is licensed to carry a total of 630 persons, including crew, so the passenger manifest is within the limits of the ship. But the ship is slightly overloaded by weight when you add up the fuel, water, the passengers and crew, plus the weight of the cars, trucks and coaches. Overloading like this is quite common, and the captain even tells the shoreside management that they're overloaded. The last officer on deck is supposed to be Assistant Boatswain Mark Stanley, and it's his responsibility to close the bow doors before the mooring lines are dropped. But Stanley's not on the deck. He went to his cabin for a short break after clearing the car deck when they arrived. When the harbour station's call is sounded and the ship's mooring lines are dropped, Stanley is still asleep in his cabin. Chief Officer Leslie Sable should now stay on deck to make sure the bow doors are closed, or be relieved by Stanley, whichever happens first. But he needs to get to his harbour station on the bridge, so he leaves G-deck with the bow doors still open. He's confident that the assistant boatswain will soon return from his cabin. Terence Ayling, the first boatswain, is the last person on deck, but it's not his responsibility to close the doors, and he doesn't know that the chief officer has left or that the assistant boatswain is absent from duty. In the wheelhouse, Captain David Lurie, the master of Herald of Free Enterprise, assumes the doors are already closed. From his position on the bridge, he can't see the doors. There's no indicator light in the wheelhouse to alert him to the problem, and Chief Officer Sable is supposed to warn him if there's a problem with the doors. But Sable doesn't mention anything. The crew of the Herald are under pressure to leave immediately. They're already 5 minutes behind schedule because of the longer loading procedure at Zeebrugge. And there's pressure to turn the ship around quickly. The company sent a memo to the assistant manager dated the 18th of August 1986, which reads,
"Every effort has to be made to sail the ship 15 minutes earlier. I expect to read from now onwards. The ship left 15 minutes early. Put pressure on the first officer if you don't think he is moving fast enough. Let's put the record straight. Sailing late out of Zeebrugge isn't on. It's 15 minutes early for us."
After completing the loading operations in Zeebrugge, the Herald begins its departure procedure. It starts to move away from number 12 berth at 18:05. It goes astern out of the dock, then turns to starboard at the end of Kennedy Quay. After completing its turn, it sails towards the harbour exit at a speed of 14 knots. The weather is good with a light easterly breeze and a small swell. At 18:24, slightly under 20 minutes after the engine start, the Herald passes the harbour's outer mole. The Herald is running late, and Captain Lurie is eager to make up the lost time. He ignores the ship's speed restrictions, which would prevent water from coming over the bowspade while the vessel is trimmed down at the bow. The Herald accelerates from 14 to 19 knots. The vessel's bow, which is already low in the water, plows deeper under the waterline, which increases the height of the bow wave. In the shallow water, the vessel experiences a force called squat. As water passes underneath the ship in shallow water, it's squeezed into a tighter space, and as the water speeds up, it creates a low pressure that sucks the ship down further. The ferry's bow is low in the water, and the squat effect pulls it deeper. With the bow doors open, icy seawater spills over the bowsprit and flows into the main deck. Most ships are subdivided into watertight compartments, but a ro-ro ferry like the Herald has a vehicle deck that's one continuous open space. As the ferry accelerates, seawater flows through the length of the ship. The heavy water increases the weight in the ferry, pushing it far beyond its already overloaded limit. A layer of water floods the entire length of the main deck. As the ferry rocks gently from side to side in the light swell, the water follows the movement of the ferry. This phenomenon is called the free surface effect. The seawater accumulates on the left side of the vehicle deck, upsetting the ferry's balance. In a matter of seconds, the ferry lists 30 degrees to port. Then the water settles and the ship doesn't list any further. The captain and crew have only a moment to catch their breath before the Herald veers slightly to starboard under the weight of the water on board. Then it slowly settles into an almost 90-degree list. At 18:28, the Herald capsizes onto a sandbar with its starboard side above the surface. This sudden turn to starboard in the last moments and capsizing onto the sandbar prevents the Herald from sinking entirely into the deep water of the center channel. This sequence of events takes less than 90 seconds. The crew don't have time to make a mayday call, alert the passengers, lower the lifeboats, or deploy life jackets. Water quickly overwhelms the ship's electrical systems and short-circuits both the main and emergency power, plunging the ferry into darkness. It's high tide and the Herald is on its port side, half submerged in shallow water less than a mile from shore. The Belgian dredger Sanderus is dredging between the new and old mole on the western side of the channel. The crew notice the Herald veer to starboard, making a hard right turn almost perpendicular to the channel, then heel to port and list onto its left side and capsize onto the sandbank. 30 seconds later, the ferry's lights disappear. The Sanderus immediately notifies Port Control Zeebrugge on VHF while setting course for the scene of the accident. They report the bow doors appear to be wide open. The Sanderus is the first vessel to arrive on the scene, and the crew immediately start searching for survivors. On board the Herald, many of the people on the starboard or high side of the ship manage to clamber through the corridors and escape onto the side of the ferry. Others are submerged in freezing water without life jackets in pitch darkness. Some people are able to climb to safety, while others are left struggling to hold on amongst floating debris and bodies. Members of the crew who make it out onto the high side of the ferry realize there are passengers still trapped inside the ship. Their training has always focused on evacuating the ship with at least 30 minutes to launch lifeboats and disembark everyone safely. The crew aren't prepared for this scenario. Bosun Ayling takes responsibility for organizing the rescue efforts. A crew rescue team goes inside the ferry to look for passengers who are still trapped. Another team waits outside the ferry and leads passengers to a temporary holding area and assists passengers while they wait for rescue to arrive. The first team goes to the bridge to check on the officers, then they make their way through the passenger spaces. They gain access by smashing windows on the top side of the ship. They lower ropes into the darkness below and haul passengers out of the water. The temperature of the sea in March is near freezing, so they're racing against the onset of hypothermia. The team inside the ferry search for anyone still alive. They have to act fast and decide quickly if an unconscious person is dead or alive. They sort the bodies, alive to the left and dead to the right. Anyone shouting is given priority. As they move through the watery hallways in darkness, the crew hear the voices of their colleagues crying for help. The only thing worse than hearing the crying is when the voices go silent. It doesn't take long for rescue services to arrive, but the Herald's crew stay on the wreck to help evacuate the passengers that are still alive. Crew members continue working until they collapse from exhaustion or are removed by the rescue services. Port Control Zeebrugge sends out a Mayday relay requesting all vessels to assist. Nearby ferry vessels, tugboats, a crane barge, and numerous small boats and fishing vessels arrive on the scene. They search the area for survivors. The ro-ro vessel Gabriel Veer drops anchor just west of the wreck and prepares a helipad on its upper deck. Then they open their stern ramp to receive casualties. Belgian Air Force helicopters and Navy divers arrive at 19:25. They coordinate the rescue operation, which includes naval vessels from England, the Netherlands, and Germany. Police, fire, and port emergency services stand by for survivors to be brought to shore. Fleets of ambulances stand ready to rush survivors to 6 hospitals on high alert. Red Cross volunteers from all walks of life rally to bring comfort to survivors and their relatives. The search continues into the early morning. At 02:15, just after low tide, the rescuers begin a systematic search of the wreck. The tide is starting to turn. By 02:45, the rapidly rising tide forces the rescue team to suspend the search and resume during daylight when the tide starts to recede. Most of the victims still trapped inside the ship die from hypothermia in the near-freezing water. Despite the Coast Guard, Navy, and civilian rescue efforts, over a third of the people on board don't make it out alive. 193 lives are lost, including half the crew of 80 people. Most of the victims are British citizens. Almost all die from drowning or hypothermia. Towards the end of April 1987, the Herald was refloated and towed to a yard in Vlissingen Harbour in the Netherlands. The first plan was to repair the vessel and return it to service, but no buyer could be found, so the Herald was sold for scrap metal. The Townsend Torreson branding was painted over for its final voyage to a scrapyard in Taiwan. In October 1987, the jury at the coroner's inquest came out with 187 verdicts of unlawful killing. 7 people employed by the company were charged with gross negligence manslaughter, and the operating company P&O European Ferries was charged with corporate manslaughter. But the case collapsed when the judge directed the jury to acquit the company and the 5 most senior defendants. The Merchant Shipping Act of 1979 states that it's not an offence for a ro-ro ferry to go to sea with its bow doors open. Since then, several improvements to the design of this type of vessel have been put into regulations. Indicators on the bow show if the bow doors are open, watertight ramps fitted to the bow sections at the front of the ship, and freeing flaps that allow water to escape from the vehicle deck. In 1990, the regulations for the height between the vehicle deck and the waterline was raised from 76 centimeters to 125 centimeters for all new ro-ro ships. Some vessels have completely removed the bow door configuration and only use a rear door design. New International Maritime Organization regulations are in place that prohibit an open, undivided deck of this length on a passenger ro-ro vessel. Both of the Herald's 2 sister ships operated for almost 2 decades before being retired from service and scrapped in 2012 and 2015. Ocean-going oil platforms are designed to withstand the most severe weather conditions. In the middle of the ocean, hundreds of miles from land, the crew of the Ocean Ranger put their faith in the technology and integrity of the oil rig. But when poor training, bad design, and extreme weather conditions line up, not even their faith can save them. The Ocean Ranger is a self-propelled, semi-submersible offshore drilling rig working in an area called the Grand Banks. It's owned by an American company, Ocean Drilling and Exploration, or ODECO for short. It's chartered to Mobil Oil Canada, who own the drilling rights for Hibernia oil field. Mobil Oil Canada is a subsidiary of the American company Mobil Corporation. At the time it's built, it's the world's largest semi-submersible platform. The rig weighs almost 25,000 tons. It's 396 feet long, 362 feet wide, and 337 feet high, making it as high as a 30-story building. Of course, when it's floating, almost a third of that is below the waterline. It floats on two 400-foot long pontoons that lie 80 feet below the waterline. These pontoons have ballast tank compartments that can be partially filled with seawater. This helps to stabilize the rig in rough seas. It's capable of drilling in ocean depths of 1,500 feet. The Grand Banks lie in the North Atlantic Ocean, 166 miles east of St. John's, Newfoundland in Canada. It's known for its rich oil and gas reserves. It's also known for its severe weather conditions, particularly in winter. And the ocean depths in the area range from 100 feet to 600 feet. On the morning of the 14th of February 1982, 84 crew members aboard the Ocean Ranger receive weather forecasts that predicts a severe winter storm is rapidly approaching the Grand Banks. The storm is linked to a major Atlantic cyclone. This time of year, the region is often subjected to extreme weather events, and this incoming storm is forecast to be particularly powerful. The Ocean Ranger is designed to weather such an extreme storm. The rigs previously withstood harsh conditions, leading the crew and the rig's operators to have confidence in its ability to handle this storm. The crew of the Ocean Ranger start to prepare for the severe weather. Standard procedures involve securing any loose equipment, checking that all weather-tight doors and portholes are sealed, and ensuring the stability of the rig by managing its ballast tanks. The ballast control system is critical in maintaining the rig's stability. It regulates the amount of water in the ballast tanks located beneath the rig, allowing the rig to adjust its buoyancy and stability in response to the sea conditions. In preparation for the storm, the crew check the system thoroughly. Even though they start making these necessary precautions, there's no immediate cause for concern. They know the rig's weathered these storms before. Despite the expected severity of this storm, regular operations on the rig continue. As the evening sets in, the storm reaches the Ocean Ranger. High winds and towering waves dwarf the immense size of the Ocean Ranger. It's designed to handle winds up to 100 knots and waves up to 110 feet high. But this storm is proving to be extraordinarily powerful, with waves that go beyond the rig's calculated limits. At 1900, a rogue wave hits a nearby rig, the Sedco 706, which is also operated by Mobil. The wave damages deck gear and washes away a lifeboat. Despite the deteriorating weather and increasing sea state, the Ocean Ranger continues its drilling operations. The crew have faith in the rig. And the culture of the offshore industry is that interruptions to operations are avoided at all costs. However, the conditions are becoming challenging. The crew have to navigate the rig in the stormy weather, working to keep everything running smoothly and safely. This requires constant monitoring of the rig's systems, especially the ballast control system that is crucial to maintaining the rig's stability in the turbulent sea. Communication with the shore also continues, reporting on the rig's status and the evolving situation. This commitment to continuing operations in spite of the declining weather conditions goes to show the level of confidence they have in the Ocean Ranger's design and capabilities, or perhaps their fear of reprisals for abandoning their station. 55 to 65 foot waves batter the Ocean Ranger. A rogue wave slams into the Ranger just past midnight. This rogue wave is significantly larger than other waves in the storm, which are already pushing the Ranger to its calculated limits. The wave strikes with such force that it shatters the glass of a porthole window in the ballast control room, the nerve center responsible for maintaining the rig's stability. The porthole is only 25 feet above the waterline. With each subsequent wave, seawater pours into the room through the broken porthole. This room is filled with the electronic equipment and control panels that control the ballast tank systems. With seawater flooding the control center, systems start to malfunction almost immediately. The seawater causes significant electrical shorts within the system, leading to the malfunction of key components in the ballast control system. At 2100, the Sedco 706 radio operator picks up radio communication on the Ocean Ranger describing how valves on Ocean Ranger's ballast systems appear to be opening and closing on their own. The crew can't control the rig's list and trim, and it becomes progressively more unstable. While the crew try to manually control the ballast, the storm gets worse and more seawater pours into the control center. Without the ability to properly control the ballast tanks, the rig starts to list or tilt towards the front of the rig. This means that as the rig rides into the oncoming waves, its bow is riding lower into each subsequent wave, which pushes it further into the water rather than riding up and over the oncoming waves. Water starts to flood the forward chain lockers in the corner support columns. The crew operating the ballast control have several disadvantages. Water is wreaking havoc with the automatic control system, but they don't have the proper training to know how to manually control the system. They don't even have a manual to look up how to override the automatic system and take manual control. That might not matter anyway. As the bow dips, it forces the stern higher out of the water. The ballast control pumps are in the stern of the vessel. As the bow sinks and the stern rises, the ballast pumps don't have the power to pump water up such a long incline and out at the stern. The degree of listing increases with every passing hour. The crew begin to implement emergency procedures. These are sets of predefined actions designed to regain control over the rig's stability and prevent a complete disaster. They unsuccessfully try to manually control the ballast tanks. They halt all drilling operations and prepare for a potential evacuation. They shut down all non-essential systems and operations on the rig in order to focus all resources on crisis management. They shear the drill string and cut away from the blowout preventer, something the Deepwater Horizon wasn't able to do. I'll leave a link to that video here. While the crew are experienced and they've been trained for emergency situations, the combination of a severe storm, malfunctioning equipment, and a listing rig creates an exceptionally challenging and dangerous situation. At 0052, the Ocean Ranger makes a mayday call. Standby support vessel Seaforth Highlander is requested to come in close. Countermeasures against the 10 to 15 degree list are proving ineffective. Canadian Coast Guard and mobile operated helicopters are alerted just after 0100. Hospitals in St. John's are put on standby. The support vessels Bolton Tor and Norditor, the standby vessels of Sedco's 706 and Zapata Ugland, are sequestered by the Canadian Coast Guard to provide assistance. In an emergency situation, Coast Guards have the right to take control of a vessel at sea in order to assist in an emergency. I've been sequestered in the waters around Cape Town when a small boat lost its engines. The Coast Guard directed my crew and I to the area, but by the time we got there, another larger vessel arrived on the scene who was more capable of assisting than the sailboat I was in. The support vessels approaching the Ocean Ranger are experiencing the same winter storm as the Ocean Ranger. High winds, rough seas, and poor visibility create dangerous conditions that limit the ability of the rescue teams to reach the Ranger. They must navigate through the violent storm, reach the increasingly unstable Ocean Ranger, and then evacuate the crew in extremely challenging conditions. Every minute counts. At 0130, Ocean Ranger transmits its last message. There will be no further radio communications from the Ocean Ranger. We are going to lifeboat stations. Abandoning any boat in the ocean is a big decision. Today, the rule of thumb is that you step up onto your life raft, which means your boat has already sunk beneath you. But to evacuate an offshore oil rig adds several dimensions of complexity. Gathering essential survival gear, ensuring all crew members have life jackets, and readying the lifeboats for evacuation, all while the rig is tilting. Abandoning the rig is a last resort for the crew. It means leaving the perceived safety of the rig and facing the harsh elements of the storm in a lifeboat. It must be terrifying to climb off a huge vessel that's been destroyed by the storm and climb into a tiny boat that, by comparison, is the size of a bathtub. These preparations are taking place amidst rising panic and confusion, with the crew acutely aware that their lives hang in the balance. Lifeboats are designed to be launched even in extreme conditions, but the severe list of the Ocean Ranger makes it extremely difficult. The crew struggle to launch them against the tilt of the rig, the intense wind, and the monstrous waves. The rig's lifeboats are designed to use a gravity drop system, and so the rig needs to be relatively level for them to launch. The crew managed to launch at least one lifeboat. The Seaforth Highlander support vessel arrives on the scene. they can see bodies floating in the water. A lifeboat with 8 or 9 men approaches them. The lifeboat steams across the stern and pulls alongside their port quarter. The Seaforth is able to throw lines to the life raft. Before they can bring anyone on board, the life raft is battered against the hull of the Seaforth Highlander and collapses. The men in the water cling to the lifeboat, which remains overturned. The Seaforth fights its way through the swell and wind to reach the men. They slowly succumb to the cold. Only one man is seen wearing an orange survival suit. The Seaforth maneuvers into position and narrowly misses chopping him up in its propellers. The crew on deck throw a grappling hook to try and pull the man onto the boat. It hooks his life jacket, but the man slips below the waterline. It's simply not possible to pull men from the water in such rough conditions, with the equipment and deck setup they have. Rescue teams from the Coast Guard, merchant vessels, supply boats from other oil rigs, aircraft and helicopters descend on the scene. Rescue workers battle against towering waves, freezing temperatures and powerful winds as they search for survivors. At 02:30, the first rescue helicopter arrives on the scene. Captain Mike Clark, the pilot of the search and rescue helicopter from Gander, lowers search and rescue technician Master Corporal Randy Brown from a 24-meter cable into the freezing water and howling gale to try and retrieve the first man they see. He's already dead. Snow and waves estimated at 16 meters make their efforts impossible. It's the first and last airborne rescue attempt. The conditions are too dangerous. Flying over the search area, rescue helicopters fight against winds approaching 90 miles an hour. The heavy seas make body recovery impossible. Captain Clark instead tries to guide the support vessels to bodies in the water. It quickly becomes clear that the supply ships are having to fight for their own survival. Sending men out on deck to recover bodies is a suicide mission. A rescue helicopter lands for refueling on another rig. The rig is pitching violently in the heavy seas. The helicopter crew becomes seasick to the point they have to abandon the refueling and return to their base on land. The rig's severe list deteriorates until it reaches a critical point where the rig is no longer stable. At 03:13, the Ocean Ranger capsizes and sinks below the waterline. The search and rescue operation turns into a recovery operation. In the days that follow, debris and personal effects from the Ocean Ranger wash up on the Newfoundland coast. Even though hospitals in St. John's are on standby, not one patient from the Ocean Ranger is admitted. All 84 crew members aboard the Ocean Ranger are lost. Only 22 bodies of the 84 crew are recovered. They're brought to Pier 17 in St. John's Harbour. Newspaper reporters are held back so that no photographs can be taken. A Russian trawler, Mechanic Tarasov, sinks in the same storm. The bodies of the Russian seamen are brought to the same pier. Off-duty Ocean Ranger crew members were asked to check the Russian bodies to make sure no men from the Ocean Ranger were accidentally sent to Russia. After the storm has passed, sonar and underwater ROVs are used to locate the wreckage of the Ocean Ranger on the sea floor. The rig lies in water around 100 feet deep. It's decided that this shallow depth poses a hazard for marine traffic, and so the rig will be refloated and sunk in deeper water. A European company is given the contract to salvage the rig. During these operations, 2 divers are sent to recover fuel from tanks in the pontoon. They cut into the pontoon using a cutting torch. Gases from the fuel ignites, creating an explosion, killing the 2 divers. Another diver is killed a week later when a large piece of metal debris falls from the salvage ship and crushes him against the sunken rig, bringing the total death toll of the Ocean Ranger to 87 men. On Tuesday, the 23rd of May 1990, a rare typhoon hits the Gulf of Thailand, capsizing the drill ship Seacrest. 91 of the 97 crew members don't survive. A series of upgrades and calculations are called into question. The Unocal Corporation is an American petroleum company. It has its roots dating back to the late 19th century. Headquartered in El Segundo, California, it plays an important role in both domestic and global energy projects. Unocal is a key member of the Cent Gas Consortium. They're tasked with constructing the Trans-Afghanistan pipeline, connecting the Caspian area through Afghanistan to the Indian Ocean. The project is complicated following the Taliban siege of Kabul in 1996. But Unocal finds a way to work with the Taliban to build the pipeline. In August 2005, Unocal merges its entire upstream petroleum business with Chevron, making Unocal a wholly owned subsidiary. Although Unocal ceases operations as an independent entity, it continues to execute numerous activities under the banner of Union Oil Company of California, now a Chevron company. Drillship Seacrest is named the Scan Queen when it's built and later changes to Seacrest. It's constructed by Far East Levingston Shipbuilding Limited in Singapore, owned by the Unocal Corporation and operated by Great Eastern Drilling and Engineering Company. It's registered in Panama and completed in 1977. The ship measures 110 meters in length, 21 meters in beam, and draws 7 meters below the waterline. In adherence to Mobile Offshore Drilling Unit or MODU code requirements, the ship has lifeboats and life-saving equipment to safeguard the entire crew. SOLAS, or Safety of Life at Sea regulations at the time, specify there must be lifeboats for the full crew on either side of the vessel. When it's launched, Seacrest uses a Kelly and rotary table positioned at the drill floor's center to grip and rotate the drill string. The drill string passes through the Kelly, which grips and rotates the drill string on the rotary table. Seacrest has been operating in the Gulf of Thailand since 1981, drilling gas wells for Unocal. When drilling, the ship is moored over the well site by 8 anchors distributed around the ship. Each anchor weighs 14 tons and is connected to the ship by wire cables, 50 millimeters thick and over 2,000 meters long. In the summer of 1989, Seacrest undergoes a maintenance and upgrade program. All of the anchor cables are replaced with new cables and the drilling system is upgraded. The upgrade extends and reinforces the derrick to support a top drive. The large top drive DC motor is mounted on guardrails in the derrick. The drill string is suspended and rotated from above. After these modifications to Seacrest, the stability of the rig is recalculated and the calculations are approved by the American Bureau of Shipping, or ABS. Adding a top drive drill system has pushed the center of gravity up. In order to lower the center of gravity and make the vessel more stable, an oil tank on deck is converted into a drill water tank and 2 void spaces are converted into oil tanks. The rig isn't surveyed after the maintenance and upgrades, and it doesn't have a stability test to confirm the center of gravity calculations. It's sent straight back into the Gulf of Thailand to continue drilling. In the Gulf of Thailand, drillship Seacrest has been riding the outskirts of a tropical storm since Tuesday, the 31st of October 1989. It's anchored and drilling in the Platong field. Thailand's military and marine weather forecast joined forces with a private weather service to supply information about the storm to Unocal's local partner, Mitsui Oil Exploration Company. They accurately anticipate the storm's path towards the Seacrest's operational zone. The superintendent ignores the severe storm warnings and tells his team there hasn't been a typhoon for 50 years in the Gulf of Thailand, so keep working. On Tuesday, the 2nd of November, drilling operations continue while the storm intensifies. By 1200, the storm is on the horizon, approximately 70 miles southeast of Seacrest, with winds at the ship reaching a steady 25 knots, occasionally gusting to 38 knots. Its strength increases throughout the day leading up to Friday, the 3rd of November. Unocal doesn't share the information about the approaching typhoon with Seacrest. It's been over 4 decades since a typhoon originated in the Gulf of Thailand. It's not very common. Typically, typhoons form outside the Gulf, which gives more lead time to gauge their intensity and trajectory. There's a sudden surge in the storm's power near the Platong field during the morning of Friday the 3rd of November. As it nears Seacrest, the weather evolves into a raging typhoon, and Seacrest doesn't have the capability to access marine weather forecasts. Unocal has removed the radio equipment from Seacrest needed to monitor weather services. Instead, the ship's captain gets a daily weather fax from Unocal headquarters in Bangkok, which is sent to the company's executive on board. The fax is a general weather report and not the specialized marine weather forecast that the Thai military have shared with Unocal. Instead, Unocal sends the daily report from the Meteorological Department of Thailand in Bangkok, which focuses on the inland weather. Typically, a typhoon will dissipate once it makes land, so the report underplays the strength of the typhoon at sea. On the 3rd of November, the drill pipe has reached a depth of 1,130 meters. At 2400, the superintendent finally gives the orders for drilling activities to be shut down. At 0100, winds and the sea state build significantly. By 0300, the drill pipe in the drill hole is hanging on the lower rams, which is where it can be cut off in an emergency. But the rig workers don't have time to drill the 27-meter length of drill pipe that remains upright in the derrick. They're forced to leave the heavy pipe in the derrick with the top drive at the top of the derrick, shifting the center of gravity to its highest point. At 0430, the support vessel Grey Guard releases from its mooring buoy and initiates evasive maneuvers to avoid hitting Seacrest in the swell and wind. At 0530, the riser is ripped out of its mooring, adding to the mounting challenges. The riser is the section of infrastructure under the water that helps provide buoyancy to the drill string. The support vessel Grey Guard gets permission to leave the field. At 0945, Seacrest loses anchor cables 3, 6, 7, and 8. With no tension left on cables 4 and 5, the vessel's stability hinges on anchors 1 and 2. From 0955 to 1040, radio communications are intermittent because of a loss of power. Support vessels in the area can see that Seacrest maintains its position. At 1000, Unocal establishes an emergency center in Bangkok to provide assistance to its fleet of vessels. Lookouts stationed on the Platong platform prepare for a potential sea rescue. At 1016, Seacrest establishes contact with Bangkok, which advises releasing all cables and maintaining one anchor while steering into the weather. Storm position updates are relayed to the rig by Bangkok. Seacrest tells Bangkok that the situation is stabilizing despite water getting into the standby generator room. Wind speeds are up to 85 knots. At 1100, the company executive on Seacrest reports that the vessel is holding onto number 1 anchor cable and the ship's thrusters are working at maximum capacity. Then Seacrest reports they've lost number 2 anchor and cables 4 and 5 are slack, leaving only number 1 anchor holding. Bangkok advises the ship that if the number 1 anchor cable breaks, they should release cables 4 and 5. At 1217, the eye of the storm passes directly over Seacrest. But Seacrest reports they've lost number 1 anchor and the ship is listing 5 degrees to port because some drill gear has shifted. Seawater has inundated the mudroom and several compartments across the ship have sustained damage. They compensate by adjusting the levels of drilling mud. Crew members in the aft quarters are worried about getting caught below deck if the rig floods. They try to get out onto the aft deck. As the rig rolls and waves crash over the deck, men desperately cling to the railings and scramble to hold their footing. Kent Nolan, one of the crew, uses a fire hose to create a lifeline for men to hold onto. This lifeline allows the crew to leave the aft quarters and hold themselves on deck. At 1250, Seacrest tries to contact the drill ship Robre T4, but the message isn't received. At 1326, Seacrest sends its final communication. A 5-degree list to port and the drill pipe has dislodged. The search and rescue effort is overseen by Unocal and the Thai Navy. Unocal has no emergency response plan in place, so they improvise as they go. They recruit helicopters, boats, and divers into the rescue operation. On Saturday, the 4th of November, a helicopter locates the capsized wreck, floating inverted about 4 nautical miles from the well site. Divers enter the wreck searching for any trapped crew, while supply boats and helicopters scour the surrounding waters for potential survivors. The divers find 2 bodies on the ship's bridge, but no survivors. By Sunday the 5th of November, UNOCL supply boats and helicopters have covered a vast area, approximately a 30-mile radius from Seacrest. The search area is defined by the United States National Search and Rescue Manual. No survivors are found. Between the 5th and 6th of November, Thai fishing boats and the Thai Navy find 6 survivors in 2 separate groups, almost 70 miles northwest of Seacrest. Now, UNOCL ignore the US Search and Rescue Manual and work out the trajectory of where any survivors could be drifting, factoring in wave, wind, and currents under the typhoon conditions. The calculations show that the survivors drift further and faster in the first 24 hours than the initial 30 nautical mile search radius. UNOCL redirected search efforts to this region. 4 Thai survivors sue UNOCL for personal injuries, and the families of lost crew members pursue wrongful death claims. They focus on 2 primary causes. Firstly, they hold UNOCL responsible for not evacuating non-essential personnel and preparing the Seacrest for heavy weather in advance of an approaching tropical cyclone, based on available marine forecasts. Secondly, they claim UNOCL failed to ensure the ship's seaworthiness in its drilling mode while using anchor moorings and leaving drill pipe in the derrick, which directly led to the top-heavy vessel capsizing. As part of its defense strategy, UNOCL Thailand's legal team engages a private company called Failure Analysis Associates Incorporated, or FAAA. FAAA conducts a comprehensive investigation into the events surrounding the ship's loss. The FAAA's investigation encompasses the ship's physical condition and design, weather effects, search and rescue efforts, and safety protocols. The Thai survivors aren't interviewed, and their testimony isn't considered during the company's investigation. The company doesn't look at the marine forecasts provided by the Thai military to UNOCL leading up to the storm. They conduct an in-depth stability review and conclude that the ship conforms to the American Bureau of Shipping standards, and that the modification of the ship to include a top drive unit has improved stability because of the conversion of the drill water and oil tanks, which add to the ballast as part of the modifications. But they do also note that they don't find any records of ABS calculations or certification related to the ship's stability after the top drive modifications. They also find that UNOCL have made errors in their calculations for the moment the ship will overturn in wind. Despite the errors in calculations and lack of testing, their final report says that at the time the ship capsizes, it's operating within acceptable standards for stability. Then they highlight that the ship's operation manual has instructions which allow the ship's vertical center of gravity to exceed acceptable limits, potentially reducing stability. Nevertheless, FAAA says that's not relevant because in day-to-day operations, the ship stays below the maximum allowable vertical center of gravity before the capsize. The FAAA reports that most crew members gather on the main deck near abandoned ship stations, but the survivors say most crew gathered on the aft deck. FAAA concludes that the ship appears to handle the seas and wind satisfactorily until it encounters larger waves that contribute to the capsize. The survivors disagree, saying the ship struggled with the wind and waves leading to Seacrest capsizing. FAAA recommended that a lawsuit is unfounded. UNOCL hired FAAA to investigate the accident. Even though they uncovered shortcomings in the design, stability calculations, and operations manual, they still recommend that Seacrest was seaworthy under the letter of the law. If they'd been hired by the victims, I wonder if their recommendation would be the same. After extensive negotiations in Houston, Texas, UNOCL reaches a settlement with the families of those who died, avoiding a trial and settling all their claims. Kent Nolan, who rigged a lifeline for the crew, died on the ship's bridge with the master when the Seacrest capsized. Divers find the ship's battery-operated clock. It reads 13:50, the time the Seacrest capsized. During a gale force 8 storm in the Baltic Sea, passengers and crew hear a loud metal crash at the front of Estonia's flagship ferry. It's a cold, stormy September night, and the MS Estonia is in perilous conditions. Fast action is needed to stop her from sinking. But the crucial moment to prevent a disaster is missed, and water begins to flood the vessel. The ship quickly fills with more water and rapidly sinks sideways below the waterline. Passengers scramble over each other to escape the outer deck. Few will make it. The MS Estonia was a cruise ferry built in 1980 for the Finnish company Reederei Absali by Meyer Werft in Papenburg, West Germany. During the 1980s and early 90s, it was deployed on ferry routes between Finland and Sweden by various companies. In 1986, a passenger was murdered on board. In 1987, another murder and an attempted murder. In 1993, it was sold to Nordstrom and Tullin for use on S-Line's Tallinn to Stockholm route, the last route it would sail. The MS Estonia was Estonia's largest ship at the time, with the capacity to hold 2,000 passengers. It could also carry freight and up to 460 cars. It had 11 decks with passenger facilities located on decks 1, 4, 5, and 6. The crew had decks 7 and 8, and decks 2 and 3 were for cars and freight. Estonia was a roll-on, roll-off ferry with vehicle access through the bow. The bow was built with an upward opening visor and a retractable car ramp that was positioned inside the visor when it was closed with a watertight seal. At 19:15 on the 27th of September 1994, MS Estonia departs Tallinn, Estonia, bound for Stockholm, Sweden on its regular journey. It's slightly behind schedule, but no one is aware of any problems. It's expected in Stockholm the next morning on schedule. 989 people are on board. 803 are passengers, mainly from Sweden. 186 are crew, mainly Estonian. The actual number may have been even higher. The ship was fully loaded and it's listing just slightly to starboard because of poor cargo distribution. A storm is brewing and the weather is deteriorating. In what will eventually turn into a gale force 8 storm, gusts of wind are strong and the waves are high. There's rain and it's cold. The temperatures are around 10 degrees Celsius. Not that this is necessarily unusual for the Baltic Sea at this time of year. Although it will turn out to be a problem for the MS Estonia, people aren't worried about the weather. All the passenger ferries scheduled to be at sea in the area have set out despite the weather. At first, everything proceeds as planned. It's midnight. The chief mate of the MS Mariella, a nearby ferry, tracks Estonia's speed as approximately 14.2 knots. Another nearby ferry, MS Silja Europa's officers, also estimates its speed between 14 and 15 knots. Some passengers are concerned that it's traveling too fast for the stormy conditions. Some are suffering from seasickness. Others worry about the ship's ability to handle the conditions. MS Estonia proceeds nonetheless. At 0100, the weather is still rough. Wind speeds are 34 to 56 miles per hour. This is equivalent to force 7 to 8 on the Beaufort scale. Wave heights are also still significant, with waves reaching 4 to 6 meters high. At 0110, the Estonia is on the outskirts of the Turku archipelago. Some of the passengers are in the ship's bars and restaurants, or they're at the disco. Others have retired to their cabins because they're tired or seasick. The first sign of trouble is heard when there's a loud bang with an unsettling metallic sound at the ship's bow. The sound is presumed to have been caused by a heavy wave hitting the bow's visor, but it's unclear if the ship's damaged. At this point, the captain on the bridge, Arvo Andersson, still has time to prevent a disaster. If he orders the ship's speed to be reduced, water won't rush in through the fronts. If he orders a proper inspection of the ship's visor and ramp, he'll discover that it's critically damaged. Instead, the only inspection of the visor and ramp that's carried out is to check the indicator lights that signal the ramp is opening or closing. The check reveals nothing, and the crew assumes everything's fine. The ship maintains its speed at over 14 knots. Over the next 10 minutes, more noises are heard by the ship's passengers and crew at the bow. The locks of the ship's visor have failed under the strain of the storm waves. The visor has separated from the rest of the vessel and pulled the ramp behind it ajar. The visor and ramp are torn off at points that don't trigger an open or unlatched warning on the bridge. The problem doesn't register at the indicator lights. The first metallic bang is most likely the sound of the visor's lower locking mechanism failing. The subsequent noises are from the visor rattling against the ship's hull as it wriggles open and closed while the ship rides through the heavy seas. The ship is dangerously exposed to water flowing in from the bow and no action has been taken. To make things worse, the crew continue to be oblivious as events unfold. Crew on the bridge can't see the visor from their vantage point. There is video monitoring of the inner ramp, but the monitor on the bridge isn't visible from the conning station where the crew are located. The crew can't see as the situation goes from bad to worse. At 01:15, the other locks fail on the visor and it unlocks from the ship completely. As it's torn free, it tears open the loading ramp behind it. Water rushes into the ship, which immediately takes on a heavy starboard list by 15 degrees. The Estonia begins to sink. With the visor and the ramp open to the sea, water floods onto Estonia's vehicle deck. As a roll-on, roll-off ferry, the Estonia is particularly vulnerable to capsizing. This is because having a large amount of water on the wide-open vehicle deck will spell disaster. Not just because a vehicle deck can hold a large volume of water. It's also because of what's known as the free surface effect. This is when the swirling motion of water on a large open deck hampers a boat's ability to right itself after rolling with a wave. The Estonia is suffering from this free surface effect and it's rapidly taking on more water. The water levels are rising fast and the ship is listing further. It's sinking beneath the waterline quickly and a desperate scramble for survival starts among the ship's passengers. They have minutes to escape from the ship. As the ship lists, staircases become packed with passengers and difficult to navigate with the ship at such a steep angle. Furniture and equipment fall on the passengers, trapping them in the ship. Walls become floors, making it impossible to tell which way is out. Passengers panic and fight to escape. Some freeze and stay where they are, unsure of what to do. Others are unable to make it through the packed corridors. Many of the crew try to help the passengers escape, forming human chains to pull each other out the steep passageways. Few, however, will eventually make it to the surface. The crew on the bridge begin to try and deal with the situation, but it's already too late. At 01:20, as the scramble for survival escalates aboard the Estonia, the crew finally raise the alarm. Over the ship's public address system, a quiet female voice calls out in Estonian, "Alarm, alarm, there is alarm on the ship." This is followed immediately by an internal alarm for the crew. 1 minute later, the general emergency signal is sounded. At 01:22, the ship's crew attempt to send out a mayday, but they fail to deliver a clear message.
Europa, Estonia. Silja, Europa, Estonia.
Estonia, this is Silja. You're replying on channel 16.
A mayday call follows a standard format to establish several key pieces of information. Mayday, the name of the vessel, the location, the nature of the emergency, and the number of people on board.
Estonia, Estonia.
Mayday, Mayday.
If all this information is broadcast on channel 16, then all vessels in the vicinity will know exactly how serious the situation is and how to respond.
Estonia, Silja, Europa. Are you calling Mayday?
If some of this information is missing, then the response might not be proportionate to the severity of the situation, or it might be delayed while gathering more information.
Estonia, what's going on? Can you reply?
The Estonia directs a call to MS Silja Europa, and only after making contact with their crew does the radio operator on Estonia say the word Mayday. The radio operator on MS Silja Europa, Chief Mate Taio Sapelen, replies in English, "Estonia, are you calling Mayday?" After that, the voice of Estonia's third mate Andres Tames takes over on the Estonia and the conversation shifts language to Finnish. Third mate Tames says the ship is listing 20 to 30 degrees, but they've lost power and he can't give their position right away. This delays the rescue, and for the 989 people on board, every minute counts. Their standard navigation systems aren't working. The only one that is working is the GPS, which displays the ship's position even in blackout conditions. But that's on the starboard side of the ship's bridge, which is difficult to get to because the ship's listing so severely. Some minutes later, Tames on the Estonia manages to relay their position to Chief Mate Sapelin on the Silja Europa. Either power returns to the bridge or somebody on the bridge, possibly Tames, manages to lower themselves down to the GPS. The Estonia finally radios its position to MS Silja Europa, but there's still key information missing from their emergency broadcast. They've now given their location and mentioned they're listing 20 to 30 degrees. The ships in the area will know that's bad, but Tames hasn't relayed quite how bad the situation is. That there are 989 people on board and that the ship is sinking rapidly. I can imagine Tames is in shock. He'll be fighting his instinct to flee the sinking ship, but he stays at his station. Below deck, things are going from bad to worse. Water is rising inside the ship. After it starts to list, seawater pours through the windows in the passenger cabins and through the massive windows on deck 6. Water flows down through the ceiling panels, stairwells, and down passageways as the ship lists further to starboard. Waves crash over the decks that aren't yet underwater. Water rushes through the lower decks. Passengers fight against the torrents of water rushing through the listing corridors and stairways to get to the outer deck. They struggle against the water and crowds of people in the jammed corridors. People are trapped throughout the ship. More windows give way to the heavy seas. By 0130, the ship has rolled to 60 degrees. Hundreds of passengers are trapped below the waterline. Shortly after 0130, Estonia sends her last radio message in Finnish to say, "Really bad, it's looking really bad right now." At 0150, the Estonia is still alone and it's listing at 90 degrees. Then it slips below the waterline and disappears from the radar screens of the ships in the area. It sinks in international waters about 22 nautical miles from Uto Island off the coast of Finland, settling on the sea floor at a depth of 80 meters. Meanwhile, rescue is still on its way as survivors drift in the icy waters of the Baltic Sea. 1/3 of the people who manage to escape die of hypothermia before rescue even arrives. Survivors cling to the dead bodies of the people in their life rafts, desperate to hold on to the fleeting warmth they provide. Search and rescue operations are being coordinated by the Turku Maritime Rescue Coordination Center. The Baltic is one of the world's busiest shipping areas, with 2,000 vessels at sea at any given time. Rescue plans rely on nearby ferries and boats to provide help. Helicopters can also be dispatched to help search for survivors. This scheme has worked for the relatively small number of sinkings that have occurred in the Baltic before this day. The smaller passenger numbers in previous sinkings may have helped, but the Estonia sinks rapidly and with 989 people on board. To make matters worse, the MS Mariella reports a pan to the Turku Rescue Coordination Center. Where a mayday call is specifically a life-threatening emergency situation that requires immediate action, a pan doesn't reflect the severity of the situation. It's used when a ship needs help and the situation is urgent, but there's no immediate threat to life. As the Estonia sinks, the Turku Rescue Coordination Center still hasn't acknowledged a mayday from Estonia. This is most likely because the Estonia was not very clear with its original mayday call. If they had clearly stated a mayday call that they were sinking with 989 people on board and given their location, then the ships in the area would have immediately understood the severity and scale of the situation. At 0212, the Mariella is the first of 5 ferries to reach the scene of the accident. They assess the situation, and at 0230, a full-scale emergency is finally declared. But the Mariella can't go close to the center of the accident. It's dark and they can't see the waters clearly. If they motor into the epicenter, they risk injuring survivors in their propeller. At 0305, the Mariella winches its open life rafts into the sea. 13 people on Estonia's life rafts are successfully transferred onto the Mariella. These people report the location of other rafts to Mariella's crew, who pass on the message to helicopter crews and other ships that are on their way. 2 Finnish border guard helicopters, Super Puma and Augusta Bell, set about rescuing passengers from the water. During the rescue, these helicopters are forced to land on the decks of the ferries involved in the rescue. The pilot of Super Puma reports that landing on the ferries is difficult and dangerous. Despite that, his helicopter rescues 44 people from the water. MS Isabella saves 16 people with the ship's rescue slide. In total, 137 lives are saved during the rescue operation. Only 94 bodies are recovered from the wreck. In total, 852 lives were lost. The passenger list suggests there may have been 69 more passengers that aren't accounted for. So there may have been even more deaths that night. It's Europe's worst maritime disaster since the Second World War. The sinking of the MS Estonia went on to have a major impact on ferry safety. Just like with the RMS Titanic in 1912, changes were made to general safety and life raft regulations on ferries. Amendments were made to watchkeeping standards. All EPIRBs, or emergency position indicating radio beacons, are now required to deploy automatically. On the Estonia, they had to be manually activated, and this didn't happen. If they'd been activated automatically, it would have been immediately obvious that the ship was in distress, and the location would have been clear. New life raft regulations for rescue from listing ships in rough water were also introduced. As with most accidents, the series of events started with a major incident that wasn't immediately recognized. When the first visor lock gave way, only the indicator light was checked. The crew didn't physically check the integrity of the ship. At that point, they could have stopped motoring into the rough weather bow first. If they'd gone astern and reversed into the heavy weather, then water wouldn't have entered the deck and the ship would have remained stable. Having missed that opportunity, the severity and location of the incident wasn't clearly relayed in a mayday call. Then a pan-pan call was relayed from a nearby ship, which only downplays the incident. MS Estonia's third mate, Andres Tamez, who we heard on the mayday call, went down with the sinking ship. Even with a staggering 852 lives lost in Europe's largest ferry disaster, this doesn't come close to the number of lives lost on the Doña Paz. I'll leave a link to that story here.